Ladies and gentlemen, the KDI students will be arriving at 9:30 p.m., so we look forward to their participation. And now, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant morning to you all, and welcome to day 2 of the first KDI School World Bank Fiscal Policy for Growth workshop. Once again, my name is Kelly Park, your MC for this meaningful occasion, and it is my great honor and great pleasure to be guiding you throughout today's proceedings. Now, hosted by the KDI School and the World Bank, on day 1 of the first KDI School World Bank Fiscal Policy for Growth workshop, we have shared many research results conducted under the partnership between KDI School and the World Bank, also with lively and productive discussions with Q&A sessions. Now, currently this event is broadcasting live on the official YouTube channel of KDI School. So we'd like to thank you once again for your participation here at this venue and also joining in online. Now, for day 2, we have another rich mix of expertise waiting to share their excellent knowledge and in-depth information with us. So please stay with us till the end and hope you take home lots of thoughtful and interesting exchanges back home. So without further ado, let us now begin today's session centered around the topic, Quality of Expenditure, a heat map to inform country-focused analytics. And our first speaker for today is Mr. Santiago Herrera, Senior Economist for Fiscal Policy and Sustainable Growth at World Bank. Mr. Herrera will be joining us virtually, so please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Okay, thank you for the invitation to present this work that we are doing in the unit of fiscal policy and growth. I am Santiago Herrera, and here is Hironobu Isaka, who will help me switch from this PowerPoint to an Excel sheet when it's time. The heat map is supposed to be a tool to help the country economist navigate the complicated world of assessing the complicated task of assessing the quality of expenditure heat map. The public expenditure has many dimensions. That's why this figure that is in the first slide that you are seeing is a 6-dimensional figure that physicists use for different things. I won't get into that topic, but it is just a complicated matter. Then to assess what is good expenditure, we need to have an idea of what is good expenditure. And that reminds me of the problem of an economist when asked to define what is a white elephant. And the economist said, I don't have that precise definition, but I can tell you when I see one. Then that is the image of the white elephant, and we want to keep as much as possible the elephants from getting into the budget. Then to define good spending, we need to do deductive reasoning. And first, we want the spending to meet the objectives. And second, it has to be done at the lowest possible cost. The objectives is highlighted in red because that is the guiding principle of the heat map. Then the presentation today is going to be dealing with objectives of public spending because we clustered around the different objectives of public spending numerous indicators. Then we will see which are those indicators. Then we are going to see how those indicators are aggregated, and we will see the Excel based toolkit that we have developed. And finally, we discuss something on next steps. This is ongoing work, and it needs further development and refining. Then the first, there's something that is not working, but this is the map of the entire heat map. The first line are the objectives of public spending. So we clustered them. There are three main objectives of public spending, which are resource allocation or long-term growth, which we associate with long-term growth. The second objective is stabilization, and the third objective is redistribution. And within each of those objectives, each has three subcomponents, which are, in the case of long-term growth, we clustered numerous indicators. We have 60 indicators just associated with the allocation or long-term growth objective. They are clustered into three subcomponents of sustainability, and then the sustainability, technical efficiency, and allocative efficiency. We will go along in this presentation very quickly over each of those subcomponents and some of the indicators that are there. The second objective of stabilization, we clustered numerous indicators into three subcomponents: the volatility of spending related to one, volatility of spending, two, rigidity of the budget, and a third one on procyclicality and fiscal impulse. So continuing with the objectives of fiscal policy, we have a third objective, which is the redistribution of resources. And there we clustered numerous variables into three subcomponents related to income inequality, gender inequality, and intergenerational inequality. So this is a map of the entire heat map that clusters numerous variables that are going to be aggregated to benchmark each country, all the countries, comparing it to the distribution of countries that we have. So we'll go into details now for this presentation of long-term growth. I will go very quickly because I know all of you are dying to get into the Excel sheet. But first, I have to show you a map of the forest so you don't get lost in the trees. This is, again, the sustainability component has some information, some indicators related to the government size. The number in parentheses is the number of indicators that we have related to that topic. Then we have a measure of the debt stabilizing primary balance that is related to the topic of sustainability. Long-term growth has to be sustainable for it to not be volatile, because volatility, we'll see, is associated with inefficient spending. We also have 18 indicators related to the topic of how spending is funded, either with taxes or with debt. We have different indicators related to that topic. We have a perception of sustainability, and it has the spreads and credit ratings. Now, we have technical efficient. Long-term growth has to be technically efficient. That means technical efficiency is related to the inputs per unit of output that the government uses. Then we have several measures of the quality of infrastructure, and we have measures of efficiency of public spending. Now, for being supportive of long-term growth, spending also has to be efficient from the allocative perspective. That is, in deciding whether to produce wine or cloth, the example used by David Ricardo years ago, hundreds of years, the choice of producing one good or the other is related to the choice of what are the inputs that will be used. And that we use different measures related to the quality of budget institutions. But the measure, a step backward, is the measurement of allocative efficiency is very complicated. It requires the prices of the inputs used in production, and those are very difficult to get to compare across countries. So we take an indirect approach here in this work of measuring allocative efficiency indirectly. That is, we have measures of the quality of budget institutions under the assumption that if the country has institutions that do spending, project selection and evaluation correctly, or if they have good quality of budget institutions, then the spending will be good. We also have measures related to governance of the quality of the institutions of the country. We also have some indicators of the scarcity of public capital, which is the ratios generally involves capital, public capital to public employment, the typical K-12 ratio, capital to labor ratios. We have some variables of fiscal multipliers, which is an indirect measure of allocative efficiency, in the sense that if the fiscal multipliers are big, multipliers of spending are big, that means that the projects that are being selected and executed are in the right direction. We also have some measures of the benefit cost ratio of social protection programs, with the assumption that if the country does, and this is simply because that information exists for social protection programs here in the World Bank. And the assumption that we make is if the country is doing the assessment of the social protection programs correctly, then that can be extended to the rest of the budget. And finally, spending for climate change, allocative efficiency requires that a country spends in public goods. We know that public goods will be underproduced unless there is government intervention. Then climate change is one of those goods that if the government does not spend in climate change, it is not a good indicator of the allocative efficiency. We also have indicators on fuel subsidies with just the opposite. The higher the fuel subsidies, the lower the quality of spending. We'll go very quickly and over the different indicators. In the stabilization pillar, we have 3 subcomponents, which are the volatility, rigidity of the budget, and procyclicality. I will go very, very quickly because I know we have only half hour for this presentation, and we need to leave time for the comments. I'm going to go very quickly over volatility of spending, and we'll motivate that. All these indicators are there, and sorry for the rush, but again, redistribution. The redistribution objective of the government is related to when it distributes resources, it can do it across individuals based on income or gender inequality, trying to intervene to have a level playing field in terms of gender. And it can also redistribute resources across generations. And we have numerous indicators in each of those subcomponents. The long-term growth this graph is simply GDP per capita and the level of spending per capita. So you clearly see a positive association between the two. This is data for over 150 countries in the last 40 years. So there is a clear association indicating that when you compare spending across countries, you have to control for the level of GDP. That's what we do in the Excel sheet. We also have the debt stabilizing primary balance that's within the sustainability component. We have a measure of the debt stabilizing balance, which is the difference, the gap between the actual primary balance and the debt stabilizing primary balance. And this simply shows the evolution of that variable over time. The light blue is in the 4 years between 2015 and 2019, and the purple distribution is the same variable over the recent period, and it shows a shift in the distribution to the left towards more negative values, meaning that the actual primary balance is lower than the debt stabilizing primary balance. So that means debt is growing. In those situations, the public spending is less sustainable. We also have measures of the perception of sustainability, and there are the credit ratings, traditional, and the MB spread, where the cost of debt increases as the credit ratings become less favorable. In the horizontal axis, we have there that the AAA rating is number 1, and C is level 22, the C rating. Why are we the revenue base has to be stable? Because if the revenue is volatile, so will spending be. If you look here, we have in the horizontal axis, we have the volatility of government spending, and in the vertical axis, you have the volatility of the revenue. There is a clear positive association between both the revenue and the spending. So if you want to have efficient spending, you have to have stable revenue. That's the line of reasoning. And here we have a measure of volatility of public investment. That's on the horizontal axis, and a measure of efficiency that we will see in a few seconds. But the message is that volatile spending is more inefficient. And here I jump to the measure of efficiency, which I will skip. This slide is for nerds that like me. When you want to go over the presentation, I will not go into the details of the measurement of efficiency, but that's one of the areas where here in the unit we have advanced the most in how to measure technical efficiency. We use 3 measures of efficiency. We can discuss that in the Q&A session or in another moment. Allocative efficiency is also, we talked about it, very difficult to measure. Then we adopt the indirect way of approaching allocative efficiency is through the quality of institutions, the size of fiscal multipliers, and the benefit cost ratio. That's the approach we take in the heat map. And here we just have the relationship between the quality of budget institutions. We will talk about this later, because the way we measure the quality of the budget institution is based on the PIFA indicators. And we do a linear approximation because the PIFA indicators, I don't know if you are familiar with them, those are 31 indicators constructed by the IMF on numerous, they have 31 variables. So which one of those do we take? We do a linear approximation of all of them, a linear combination of all of them to correlate that with the technical efficiency measures. And there is a clear positive association. The higher quality of institutions is associated with higher efficiency scores. Now, we jump to the second way of proxying allocative efficiency. I will go very quickly, and it's the heat map has numerous sources of technical academic papers that estimate the efficiency, but there is one, and so we use those measures, but there is one that called our attention, which is a way of going to certain structural characteristics of the economy, such as those, the openness of the economy, the rigidity of labor markets, the size of the automatic stabilizers, whether the exchange rate regime is fixed or flexible, how safe is public debt, and how effective is the spending and revenue management. Based on those characteristics, the countries are clustered into 3 quartiles for the size of the fiscal multiplier. And those are the values. And then there are some adjustments to do that I don't want to get in. I can't. I would like to, but we have very limited time. This is the case of a very special country. Korea is in red. And that is what we get for Korea regarding the size of the multipliers in the country. It compares Korea in red with the East Asia and Pacific region in dark green, in light the high income countries, and the dashed line are all the advanced economies. I will not get into a discussion of Korea with you, but we can do it at a later stage. And this is the benefit cost ratio that we talked about, that if a country has high benefit to cost ratios, then it is more allocatively efficient. It's if the country is doing the right thing in social protection and labor spending, then we assume that the rest of the spending is of good quality, of that same quality. I will jump, and I apologize for the speed with which I'm presenting all these topics, but I want to get to the Excel sheet, which I know is what you want to see. There is something on green spending, which I will skip, but it's related to, again, the public goods, the provision of public goods, and green spending is one of those. The stabilization objective, this is the second objective of policy of expenditure, and it is supposed, if the country is doing the right things on stabilization, to keep output and employment at their potential level. But why do we care about stability of the stabilization of the economy? If you look there, we have the stabilization of the consumption expenditure of the government. It's on the horizontal axis. On the vertical, it's household consumption volatility. So there is a positive association between both. If the government spending is volatile, so will the household consumption, which is that generates welfare losses. If households have volatile consumption, they would prefer having a stable consumption at a lower rate that has been at a lower level if it's stable. I won't go into more details, but this is a central aspect of why stabilization is important. Here, there is a graph. I realized it's repeated here, but again, volatile spending is more inefficient. That's what we have in this graph on volatility of investment in the horizontal axis and the efficiency measure in the vertical axis. I will skip this on fiscal impulse, but the fiscal impulse measures whether fiscal policy is injecting resources into aggregate demand or into the economy or withdrawing resources. And it has to be over the business cycle, that has to be close to zero. So in recessions, over the entire business cycle, the intervention of the government has to be neutral. That's the idea. And apologies again for the speed with which I'm presenting this, but we jump to budget rigidity. This is related to stabilization. Remember, we are looking at stabilization-related variables, and we have a measure of budget rigidity, which I will not go into the detail. It's in the note we wrote, and we can talk later. But it's the more rigid the budget, the lower the fiscal space. Fiscal space is a measure that there's a very well known by Ihan Coase and his team here in the bank on fiscal space, and they measure it in a way. He's our vice president and chief economist. So I just take his data. He has 24 variables, and we reduce it to a single measure of fiscal space and budget rigidity. We work on it. It is the more rigid the budget, the lower the fiscal space. The capacity, fiscal space is the capacity of the government to allocate resources to its priorities. And it can be also to consolidate. If the government has to consolidate, reduce the deficit, it has to be able to manipulate spending. If the budget is very rigid, it cannot do it. Then reduces the fiscal space, or that ability of the government to allocate resources where it needs to. I will skip this slide, but this is another area in which our unit has made a big progress, and I will not entertain you now with how we measure rigidity, and with your permission, I'll skip this. Redistribution, I think I'll have to skip, like many policymakers do, when there are other priorities. Redistribution is the adjustment variable. I will skip this, but again, this is just for you to see. This is the difference in the Gini coefficient before the government intervenes, and after the government intervenes through spending and through taxation. To your left, the bigger the difference between the market Gini and the one after the intervention, the bigger the difference means that the government is doing a better job in redistributing income across the rich and the poor. We have the largest differences in European and Central Asia. The smallest one is around South Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean. But this is one of the indicators we have. I'll skip this, and I apologize again, but I want to get to the heat map and the aggregation. We have numerous indicators in each of those subcomponents. Here we see, for example, in the long-term growth pillar, which is one of the objectives, we have 60 indicators, 23 related to sustainability, 10 related to technical efficiency, and 27 related to allocative efficiency. to your farther right, the last column on your right, are all the indicators. So the aggregation starts from the individual indicators from the column on your far right. Each of those variables is percentile ranked. That's each of them. We do a percentile ranking of each of those. Then we aggregate all of those related to sustainability, to government size, to each of those variables are, again, I repeat, percentile ranked, and then they are aggregated at the subcomponent level. The sustainability indicators are those related to government size, debt stabilizing, primary balance, the funding of public spending, and the perception of sustainability. All of those are aggregated into the sustainability indicator. But before that, you have to do the percentile ranking. All of those variables are in different units. Then we aggregate them. To aggregate them, we have to convert them to a similar measure, which we do is percentile rank. Then how we do the same thing for the technical efficiency variables and for the allocative efficiency variables. But how do we aggregate them into the pillar level, the long-term growth pillar level? We weigh each of those by the number of indicators. So it's a weighted average of all those indicators. The sustainability indicators are weighed by 23 divided by 60. It's like 40-something%. The technical efficiency is 10 over 60, and the allocative efficiency indicators get weighed by 27 over 60. That's how all this information is clustered into different subcomponents. This is the result. We have an overall ranking to the extreme right, but we have the three pillars that are associated with the objectives, each of the objectives that we saw in the first slides. What this slide shows, for instance, in the pillar in long-term growth, or that objective, the high-income economies have the highest ranking in the long-term growth. And by regions, that's by when the groups are by income. If you have a regional clustering of the countries, we see that in this, the North America countries have a higher ranking in the long-term objective. Similarly, in the stabilization objective and in the redistribution, and we aggregate them. We have different methods of aggregation. First, you can do an equal weights. Each of those objectives has the same weight to reach an overall ranking of the quality of spending. Or the user of the heat map can modify the objectives according to his or her preferences. Now, the rankings, this matrix, this result is important because it shows that the rankings that we do in the long-term growth objective, or in the stabilization policy, or in redistribution, the country rankings are positively correlated. That means countries that are ranked high in achieving the long-term growth objective are equally ranked higher in the stabilization objective and in the redistribution. But when you look at the correlation, these are correlation coefficients. Between stabilization and redistribution, the correlation is not as high. And we know that when countries have to stabilize, sometimes they sacrifice the redistribution objective. I will not go into further detail, but when you break the sample, you get, this is for the whole rankings over the period 2000 to 2021. But if you shorten the period and do the correlations, there are more interesting results that I don't want to, I want you to read the paper, so I'll leave you. But this is the rankings. This figure shows on the horizontal axis are the rankings of the countries according to the long-term growth pillar. And we see what is the correlation with growth. We take the countries, the rankings, and the growth of the countries. The correlation is positive, but you can barely see it in the graph. But then when you do a regression between growth, controlling for two important things, you control for the initial level of the GDP, that's the convergence hypothesis in growth, you control for that, and you control for those countries that are in war, that's the fragility, conflict, and violence dummy variable. You still get a positive correlation of the long-term growth pillar. That's the table to your right. The first variable has a very high and significant correlation. Now, we don't want to explain growth, the growth results. We just want to explore positive associations. What do the rankings that the heat map does, what do they mean? And there is something there that countries that are rated higher in that category also have higher growth. Now, we do the same thing with the scores in the stabilization pillar. That's pillar number 2, the stabilization objective. We ranked, and the countries that are highly ranked, that is on the horizontal axis, and you have inflation in the vertical axis, countries that are ranked higher in the stabilization pillar or the stabilization objective have lower inflation. And finally, the same thing, we do what is the correlation between the ranking in the third pillar, which is the redistribution objective, and we have a measure of the equality of redistribution. This measure was not used in the way that we in the computing of the pillars, just for you to be, we are not double counting the variables. So we use variables that are not related to the way in which we calculated the rankings. So we use an equality of distribution of resources that is in the varieties of democracy database that is completely unrelated to what we used in the heat map. Now, we want to show you now, this is a way of visualizing the tools. In the top left quadrant, you have the 3 objectives of policy, and the higher the rankings, then the better spending. So you have in the top, again, the top left quadrant, the 3 objectives of policy: long-term growth, stabilization or redistribution. And this is the case of Chile, which is in red, which this shows, and it compares Chile with other countries in Latin America or with the high income group of countries. Then that's panel A. Panel B shows within the long-term growth pillar, it shows the 3 subcomponents: sustainability, technical efficiency, and allocative efficiency. And we see how the country performs comparing to the high income group or the regional grouping, Latin American, Caribbean. The panel to your bottom right, that's panel D, but I'm going clockwise. The redistribution pillar, again, the 3 subcomponents are income inequality, gender equality, or intergenerational equality. And the panel to your bottom left, that is the stabilization pillar, has the 3 subcomponents and shows you how the country performs. Now, if I have time, we'll go into the Excel sheet. Is that okay? Or should we go to conclusions and next steps? Do we have time to go to the Excel sheet?
Yes, please proceed with the Excel sheet.
Okay. Okay, then we'll see how this works. Are you seeing the Excel sheet now?
Yes.
Okay, that is the same slide that we were seeing in the PowerPoint. We are now in the Excel sheet. Then we go to the tab that says overall. And here is in the Excel sheet, we have again, the overall ranking and the 3 main objectives or the 3 pillars of the heat map. You have the first long-term growth, stabilization, and redistribution. The top percentages, numbers that are here, those are remember I told you that the 3 pillars or the 3 objectives were ranked, were weighted equally, but this can change. The user can change what is the weight of each of the objectives. Then, if you want to, let's go to the long-term growth pillar. And there, remember that long-term, if you go over the presentation, the long-term growth objective has 3 subcomponents: the sustainability, and this is the percentile ranking of the specific countries. The red indicates the country is not doing very well. In this case, that red that we are seeing there in the sustainability spending is Cuba. And others that are not doing very well are the Central African Republic and Zambia, for instance. Remember, we have 3 subcomponents within the long-term growth. One of them is sustainability, the other is technical efficiency, and the other one is allocative efficiency. And these numbers here are the weights of each of these subcomponents. Those weights depend on the volume of information or the number of variables that we used to construct it. The technical efficiency, I want to go into the technical efficiency component for you to see how we go deeper and deeper into it, depending on the user's preferences and interests or needs, to what is it that they want to see of public spending. Let's go to the technical efficiency measures. So we are getting deeper and deeper into the mud. You have to tell me when you want to give up, because I can continue all day long. The first variables that we have here are in this sheet. See, when you see this _R, is that these are the percentile rankings, because the raw data is somewhere else. Remember, I told you that the raw data was converted, each variable was converted to a percentile rank, so we can aggregate them. They have to be in similar units. We have the measure of the 2 measures that we use in the in the heat map are related to the global competitiveness index of the overall quality of infrastructure quality. That's one variable, and the other is the World Bank's logistic performance index. Those are are there, and we use them to assess the quality of public spending. But now we go into technical efficiency directly, which I will not get into at this point, but there are measures that are input efficiency measures that says how much excess spending is the country using to reach a given level of output.
Mr. Herrera, we hate to interrupt, but you have to wrap up in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I warned you. Okay, then this is the heat map. And we have measures of efficiency in infrastructure, education, and health. Sorry that I don't have more time to go into other areas of the heat map, but then we go back to the PowerPoint, but we are left only with what is the use of this tool? What we were aiming is to provide our country economists, and all of this is based on publicly available information. So it can be made public to everyone, but that's for someone else to decide. For the moment, it's for our country economists to have an initial diagnosis of the quality of the public spending, and see, have a first look at where are the main deficiencies of public spending. This is for the country economists to use in their work and in their policy dialogue with authorities. So that's the use of the tool. Then next steps, where can it be improved very quickly, but we need to invest more time, is on the on the relationship between budget institutions and efficiency. That I showed you a graph where there were some linear relationships, but that is a very very brute simplification of the data, assuming that all these relationships are linear. But the problem that we have is that we have a large number of variables for the 31 PIFA indicators. How do you relate them to all the measures of efficiency that we have? We have 8 or 10 measures of efficiency, and we have 100 countries. Then we need to have a more refined
2 minutes
approach.
left, sir.
Okay, yes, I have 2 more things to say. So this is one of the areas that we need, and we have a clear direction in using machine learning to allow us to do the analysis of nonlinearity. Improving the score from 2 to 3 is not the same as improving the score from 4 to 5. It will have a different impact on efficiency or on other economic variables. And the other way in which, where we need to make progress and improve this tool, which you saw, is on missing data. We have many countries and in different variables where we have missing data. It's how can we use the machine learning method to impute data, for data imputation? That is the next step that we have to take to improve this data tool, which is again for our country economists, and we would present the data and with clarifications on when the data is imputed and when is actual data. But this is all I have to say in the time that I got, but I could go on for longer. Thank you, and apologies for the rush.
Please give a big hand. Yes, thank you, Mr. Herrera, for sharing your valuable insights with us, introducing the sustainable expenditure balance to improve fiscal policies. Thank you once again. And next, I would like to introduce our discussant for today, Dr. Paran Han. Dr. Han is a senior economist in strategy, result, and risk at the World Bank, and also the associate professor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Dr. Han will be joining us via video, so please turn your attention towards the screen. Please welcome with a big hand.
Hi, do you hear me? Hold on.
Dr. Han, can you hear
Yes.
us? Yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Loud and
we
clear.
can.
Okay. So I'm trying to. Okay. Thank you for having me as a discussant for this background paper, as well as the heat map for the quality of expenditure. And I also want to thank Santiago and Hironobu for sharing the background paper and the Excel sheet ahead of the presentation. As was introduced, I am currently working at the OPCS, but I'm also a associate professor at KDI School. So as it was presented, the quality of expenditure heat map first starts with a question: what good public spending is? And I really like the approach of how the authors built up this indicator. So you first talk about what good public spending is, and in order to specify what good public spending is, you have to go to the goals of public spending, which are ensuring efficient allocation of resources, stabilization of the economy, as well as ensuring a certain level of societal equity that the society agrees upon. And for each of these pillars, they come up with specific indicators that would capture sustainability of spending, technical and allocative efficiency. For stabilization, they would look at volatility, less indicators that capture less volatility, flexibility, and counter-cyclical spending. And for equity ensurement, they look at redistribution across income, gender, and generations. Now, I have three very straightforward comments that I have noted as I was going through the Excel sheet as well as the paper. The goal of this heat map is to provide cross-country comparisons, as well as country-specific comparison over different years. And the aggregation is a simple weighted mean over different component over three pillars. And I think Santiago explained to us how the layered aggregation works. I noticed that, because of the indicators, the sub-indicators that we choose, there are certain sub-indicators with very high correlations above 0.9, like 0.99 even. And it is not surprising because, some of the indicators are, so for instance, one indicator would be a percentage of general government domestic debt, and the other indicator would be general government external debt in percentage of general government domestic debt, and another indicator would be general government external debt in percentage of general government total debt. So obviously you would expect them to be very highly correlated. What I suggest, and I will actually show you the one of the pillars here. This is correlation coefficients among volatility indicators for the stabilization pillar. And you see some of them correlated with the correlation coefficient with very close to 1. And so what I would suggest is, we need the data. More data is the better in this case. But if we are going to come up with a dashboard outcome from this Excel sheet, maybe we want to impose a certain structure where you make the user to choose from only a certain set of indicators to be aggregated. In that way, we would avoid double counting or triple counting of a certain aspect of a feature that we want. And then, for instance, this was volatility. Another example would be one of the inequality indicators on the poverty gap reduction due to SPL and poverty headcount reduction due to SPL. They were, not surprisingly, the correlation coefficient was 0.999. So again, we would want, I think it'd be better for us to use only one in aggregation to get to the final overall comparison. Second of all, I want to talk about the appropriateness of these sub-indicators for the income inequality area, because as it was noted, I think a bit noted in the background paper, but as we know about the Aspire program and all these household surveys that generate Gini coefficients, they are quite sparse, and in terms of frequency as well as the SPL program coverage, and even in terms of the quality of the coverage across different countries, and the years are very different as well. So I think there could be a restriction where you specify which years could be aggregated together in terms within the income inequality indicator, as well as with the indicators from the other pillars, because some of the pillars have years, some of the pillars do not. So one can choose the years, one can specify the years for some sub-indicators. Some of the indicators do not have that feature, but you wouldn't want aggregation to happen when the inequality or this redistribution indicator comes from year 2000 with an indicator that comes from 2012 or 2020, because a lot of things can happen. And what would the final outcome number would mean in that case? And of course, we have to talk. We cannot ignore the attribution issue with these fiscal policy impact as well as the SPL. I mean, whether the Gini coefficients as well as the poverty gap or poverty incidence, whether there is a direct link, but then this is the limitation of the Aspire data set. And I think this needs to be more pronounced in the background paper. Finally, I just want to touch upon two different indicators that I think would warrant more discussion in the background paper. The first is climate change, that represents an aspect of allocative efficiency. I know Santiago explained it well, but I also think that because climate change spending is spending for global public goods. So this is, there are other different public goods, but then climate change spending, so spending on climate change could be a little bit different from other, nation-specific public goods. And so I think a stronger argument behind it would be good. And also on the perception of sustainability indicator, I see the point, but I think it could be argued better in the paper. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Han, for addressing thought-provoking insights regarding to the prior presentation. Thank you once again. And now we will move on to our session 2. Our second speaker for today is Dr. Sandy Pentland, professor from MIT Connection Science. He'll be joining us remotely and presenting on Big Data and Advanced Analytics for Policy Making. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. Dr. Pentland?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and hope we can find some very interesting things to talk about, sort of on the new technologies that various countries are deploying, things that we've developed. So I'm going to share my screen here and begin to talk about these. And I have 4 things that I want to talk about today. They are, let's see if we make this all work. There we go. So they are 4 different aspects of big data analytics that I think are probably directly relevant to you. And that together they form sort of a holistic analysis of things that incorporates many other things, many other effects and causes that you're not currently being able to quantify. So let me just start with the first of these four, which is economics and networks. So recently we have seen several things where social networks caused, or other sort of like social phenomena have caused serious financial problems. So the most recent thing that's perhaps the clearest is Silicon Valley Bank, where a social network Reddit channel had a lot of the large depositors, and one became very concerned about the money and recommended to the others that they withdraw the money. And because they were all large depositors, they were able to cause a run in the bank within quite literally an hour or two. And there was nothing Silicon Valley Bank could do about it. They were generally a pretty solid bank, but they had the problem that a lot of their large depositors were on the same social media. And that's not normally something we include as a risk factor, but it was demonstrated pretty clearly. And after that, we saw disturbances in some of the largest European banks, which may have actually been caused by operatives from other countries spreading rumors about the stability of these banks. Because it's not just Silicon Valley Bank, it's some of the largest banks where you can have runs on the bank, because the assumptions are, of course, is that the withdrawals and deposits are largely independent of each other, but social media wire that together. There are many such phenomena in economics. So anything that is that we attribute to animal spirits is an example of something like this, or things that are trending. And so the core problem is that we model individuals as rational and as deductive. So this is completely classic in economics, is that at the core you have independent decision makers who are looking at the data and making decisions. And that works quite well in a carefully engineered network or market. But in fact, in the real world, we pay attention to each other. And in particular, we pay attention to press, we pay attention to friends, we pay attention to peers. And that can cause these runs on the bank or other sorts of strongly nonlinear phenomena. And so one needs to sort of ask, how could we begin to incorporate that into our models? And that's the sort of thing that we've addressed over the last couple of years. And the key thing is that it turns out that the way humans incorporate the networks that surround them into their decision making is a fairly simple functional form that's a Bayes rule. Basically, the social things are taken as priors. This is experience other people have. It gives you probability, a sense of probability of how good an action is or how bad an action is. And then you do the normal sort of evaluation you do in the rational model. But now you've incorporated cues from other people in this particularly Bayesian way. And what's interesting about this is, as I'll show you, not only is this actually how markets work, but it has some fairly strong optimality conditions. So there's a couple papers about it. So the model itself appears in the journal Cognition, which is the leading sort of cognitive psychology journal out there. And a good mathematical description is in this ICML paper that we produced. And the interesting thing is that these sorts of models that have preferential attachment, in other words, people make decisions by, in part, paying attention to other people, can have strong instabilities. And we have a paper in the US National Academy of Science about this, showing that it's actually the conditions under which you can maintain stability. And this is very reminiscent of antitrust, where you look at market share, but now it's really information share that you pay attention to. not just market share. And when you get people that have overly loud voices, are able to actually reach a lot of people, then you get instability in financial decision making. And you should look at the paper. There's a good model of that. And it really sort of argues in a very fundamental way that we need to update, for instance, antitrust regulation to pay attention to communication power, data resources, and things like that. And it also makes the point that this really is not a bug in human thinking. It's not a problem that we have. It's something we evolved because it's actually far better than individual rationality. This sort of collective rationality has some very strong optimality conditions, particularly under non-stationary conditions or conditions in which cascades can happen, which is, of course, the real world is continually changing, and we have cascades. So this seems to be something that was selected by evolution to deal with these strongly non-stationary situations, and it does well as long as the stability criteria are met. But we haven't been paying attention to these stability criteria, and that's where we get things like the 2008 crash and things like that. So the model that we have and developed for people and so forth is thought of, as I said, as sort of a Bayesian estimate. It looks like a multi-armed bandit or a Thompson sampling type of a model where you have rational consideration, but then you condition that by the popularity of what other people do. And of course, you can get that estimates of that from a prior. So that's all very nice as theory, but the question is do people actually use it? And we had an experiment we did with 2,000 finance experts. So these are people that actually do trading, have trading desks that handle an average between 10 and $100 million per day. So these are professionals, they're mid-career, they're highly competent. And what we did is an experiment where we asked them to estimate prices for various commodities and gave them the time series data to look at. And then we went back after they had made the estimate and we showed them what everybody else did. So we gave them social feedback, which I'm claiming is a prior, and asked them if they wanted to change their estimates. And most of them did based on the social feedback, that prior estimate. And in fact, if you plot the risk accuracy, the sort of and the Sharpe ratio, of course, is where you are on that curve. What you find is that the people who are purely quant actually do a little better than the people that pay attention to social, but the Sharpe ratio of the people who pay attention to social is considerably better. So what happens, and we saw this in our experiment, is the people who are purely quant, the sort of normal economic theory, do in fact perform a little bit better, but they make serious mistakes sometimes. So in a repeated trials situation, they're not nearly as good as the ones who actually pay attention to the social information. And we have a paper about this where you can read about all of the details. But this is actually sort of strong confirmation of this theory because it's allowing you to predict the risk profile of professional traders based on how much they incorporate the prior of what other people are doing. And of course, it's a way to control risk profile in your organization as well as to provide better information about this sort of prior. You can also use this, incidentally, to upskill people who are not as professional. So if you think about it, so there's the rational consideration that people do, that's the top line, times the popularity of each action or trading policy. And what you can do, what you can do is by looking at this prior is you can show people actions or policies that they hadn't thought of. And we've done that with, these are not, sort of mid-career people, but they're fairly sophisticated traders. And we can look at the number of strategies they consider versus their return on investment. And as you consider more strategies in your investment portfolio, of course, you do better. But people top out typically around 3-4 strategies. They just don't investigate more. They can't consider it. And so what we've done is built tools that help people consider orthogonal strategies that are independent of the ones they're doing. And that alone helps people, first of all, consider many more strategies and be much more profitable. So this is an interesting thing because it's a way, of course, to upskill junior members of your staff to be, or the citizens, to be much more profitable, much more regular in their financial dealings. So that's the first subject I wanted to talk about is how traditional economics needs to be augmented by knowledge about what the similar people are doing and what's common in the environment. And we typically don't do that systematically, but when you do, you can get better performance overall. The second topic I want to talk about is similar. So this has to do with innovation and economic spillovers. So, built into most economics is the idea that data is available to everybody, but of course that's not true. And in fact, what you see between countries is that countries that trade together end up sharing technology and trading strategies far more than countries that don't trade together. And we've done studies in China showing the same thing. As we have cities that are connected by high-speed rail, their innovation, their businesses tend to become much more similar. And so a city that, for instance, doesn't have any IT, if it becomes connected to a city that has a strong IT industry, suddenly it will be developing new companies and new products in the IT space. That's an economic spillover that creates innovation. And it's this connection between people that does it. People learn from each other. That's that whole idea of the first part of the talk, is that it's not just book learning, it's actually what do other people do? What are good ways, good strategies, good ways of operating? And to do that, you need to know, where people work, and do they work in similar places? Do they shop in similar places? And if you have that sort of extended census data, then you can actually track the propagation of skills and predict the propagation of skills and opportunities. And we've working with the US Census to actually put this sort of data into the US Census so that we can predict the spread of behavior on a sort of neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city basis, to be able to craft policy that is sensitive to the connections each place has with other parts of the country. And you might say, well, this is all nice, but do we really need it? Let me just show you an example of using this sort of data in Beijing, where we were asked to predict the year-on-year economic growth for each neighborhood. And that data I just showed you, which is, I'll go back, the connections between neighborhoods. If you look at the pattern of connection between neighborhoods, you can predict year-on-year economic growth with very high accuracy. In fact, higher accuracy than you can from most traditional measures. And in addition, it's orthogonal to those additional measures. So it adds to your predictive power. It's not duplicative. So that's pretty interesting. If you have neighborhoods you want to sort of build on, you can now actually think about how to change transportation networks or zoning to be able to encourage this. And over the last decade, I've been working with the United Nations and census bureaus around the world to be able to make this a sort of a regular thing. And the UN Secretary General asked me to help them forge the measurement criteria in the Sustainable Development Goals. And we showed that this type of data, which is not personal data, it's just simply migratory transportation type data, can allow you to identify poverty pockets and measure inequality. It's very important in public health. You could have, for instance, predicted the spread of COVID using this. and in designing transportation networks that have the proper sort of social impact. In fact, we've just started a large project with Singapore to help them sort of integrate their neighborhoods more and up the GDP growth in neighborhoods that are lagging. And just in general, you can use these sorts of things to build optimized infrastructure in a way that you can't by just looking at the financial data, because what you're looking at is the patterns of innovation, the patterns of health, and things like that. And I recently joined the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority as an advisor to help them begin to use these sorts of techniques to be able to understand the macroeconomic environment a lot better. And as I'll show you, the same is done in at least a qualitative way by Singapore. And so the sort of leader, fleet of foot in this area, Abu Dhabi, Singapore, people like that are beginning to use these techniques. Let me just give you a couple of examples. So here, this was a study that some colleagues did where they were asked to design subway lines that would increase GDP in poor neighborhoods. And they looked at patterns of transportation. And what they did is they came up with proposal for two north-south and an east-west subway lines. And the green bits there, the sort of bright green bits, are the predicted increase in GDP as a function of having built these new subway lines. So the periphery of London is, of course, poorer than the center. And so what this line will do is help these particular neighborhoods become more wealthy. And they felt they needed two lines, not just the east-west, which was actually built, but the north-south, to be able to reach the south of London, because that's left out by the east-west line. So that's one example. Another example is we helped the country of Andorra do tourism planning. Most of their income comes from tourism. And what they'd wanted to do was optimize this. And so we helped them build a model which considered congestion, which tourists were new, how long they stayed, were they high disposable income or not, and where within the country did they stay, because you want all the country to profit. And so we came up with policies that they could implement that would produce much better outcomes in terms of not only quality of life, but income for particularly the areas that were normally not visited by tourists as much. So this is another example of the sorts of things that are not typically within economic policy, but have very strong influence on economic policy. To carry all these sorts of things out, you have to be concerned about access to the data. You have to be concerned about privacy and security. And so we've helped several countries, including Switzerland, Australia, and the US, of course, to adopt new digital architectures that give them increased access to data and increased security. So the fundamental thing is that whereas old architecture centralized data, so you take data from places and put it in one data lake, we're helping countries develop facilities for leaving the data in the silos where it's collected, medical data, transportation data, et cetera, and instead what you do is you send algorithms to the data and they return statistics. So there's no threat to privacy, there's no extra copies of data around, and what you're sharing back is basically statistics or attestations. And for instance, in the United States, we've helped, I think it's about 70% of all bank accounts move to this type of architecture. And in Europe, we helped their official statistics directorate move to this type of architecture so that they don't have to move data across jurisdictional lines. It's pretty straightforward to do. It's far more secure. And it also has this other sort of ramification, which is that when you do this sort of federated architecture, people are much more willing to participate and share insights. So instead of asking people for data, you ask them for statistics about their data. They're much more willing to do that, and it's much safer than asking them for the data itself. And it gets around many of the privacy, localization, and ownership problems that you face today. And that's why it's been so popular. And currently, we're helping Australia move to this type of architecture, starting with their medical data. We're helping France and Germany do that as well, and continuing with particularly finance in the United States. These types of systems are familiar to us, but we don't usually think about them in terms of government systems or those sorts of things. So, for instance, in MasterCard or Visa, when you buy something with a credit card or your phone, you send a routing number plus the cost of the object you want to buy through this network managed by Visa, MasterCard, others. But you don't share what it is you're buying. You don't share necessarily anything else. That goes to your bank typically, which says, yes, he has this much money or no, not. And then just sends back a yes or no to the merchant. So the merchant doesn't know what your bank is, doesn't know about your account, doesn't know about your buying habits. So it's protecting the data. It's just giving an attestation that you have enough money. And really what we're doing is we're proposing expanding that type of thing for government statistics and for management of the macroeconomy, where there's all sorts of data that is queried but not shared. And, so these sort of things are familiar. McKinsey estimates that having this type of system, which you can think of as the digital identity of the user, can add a huge amount to GDP. Because what you're doing is reducing fraud, you're giving far more data-driven access to decision making so you can make better, fairer decisions, and so forth. In Latin America, Mexico, Nicaragua, Colombia, we looked at such systems and used them to be able to look at their social payment system. So this is a system called Prospero, which gives payments to young mothers if they, have doctor appointments and send the kid to school and so forth. And what we found by looking at this sort of distributed system, you can see where the payments go. You don't know the people, you're not dealing with private data, but you can see the pattern of payments. And what we discovered is that their policies were far less than perfect. And in fact, about 20% of the payments they made were in error one way or another. And we showed them policies that could then improve that rather dramatically without additional cost and without access to the personal data. So this is something that the regulators could look at commonly that isn't dangerous to the privacy or control of the data, but allows them to tune their policies to reach the most vulnerable, the intended people for this particular program. Again, another consequence of having a federated system as opposed to a centralized system. And recently we've developed other sorts of mechanisms to be able to do auditing, so real-time provable auditing of data that you can't see. So to be able to ask, instead of ask for these long sort of text reports from companies for tax or regulatory purposes, you can now actually ask them to run a small program over their database and get out a proof, an actual like guaranteed proof that they are compliant with the regulation. And the only way for them to get around this is to construct really large scale fraud, which can be detected by other means. So the technology is improving to be able to do continuous audit of far greater things in much more detail than is possible today, and without sort of endless sort of bureaucratic overhead. Some countries have sort of noticed this and are building systems that are sometimes called Web3 or federated systems that allow you to do these sorts of payments in a sort of open banking type way, where anybody who has a secure identity can sort of plug in and do transactions, not just money, but also commodities, material, health data. And so, Temasek, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and JP Morgan have developed a system like this for Singapore's trade. And we helped Swiss do the same type of thing in Switzerland. And they just went live with a version of it implemented by Six, the company Six, for various sorts of bonds. So people are beginning to do this. The SWIFT payment system is moving to this type of architecture. We've seen shipping move to this sort of architecture. And the general trend is called tokenization or distributed ledger, distributed federated systems. And we see this happening all around the world. And it will be best practice very soon, if it's not already. The final thing I wanted to talk about is I've mentioned that social media and other sorts of things can influence financial decisions, but there's always this question of like, well, what factors do you need to consider? And I'll just show you a slide. This is from the Singapore Prime Minister's Strategy Office, where what they're considering is the influence of value chain technology, military, crypto, climate mitigation movements, physical movements, and so forth on the economy, because all these things are actually coupled together. Just like with Silicon Valley Bank, the regulation of that did not include social networks. Of course, we never do that. But yet it was the social network that caused the instability in the bank. And what they're doing is they're looking for other factors that can potentially cause instability, but also could be used to gain competitive advantage. And we've developed a set of techniques for doing this, to be able to look at all these sorts of things, look at hundreds of thousands, millions of factors if you want, and pick out the ones that are actually causing changes, and be able to quantify those. Again, interestingly, without having to actually own the data. You can do this in a completely federated way, which is amazing. And one of the applications is to detect aggressive actions by state actors. It's being used now in anti-terrorist activity and, of course, in anti-fraud activity. There's just a simple implementation of something like Ethereum, which is an encrypted platform. All the transactions are visible but encrypted. And you can use these sorts of techniques to find when things happen that shouldn't be happening. That's just a simple illustration of that. There's a lot more sophisticated things you can do. So I'm going to sort of end there. This is a sort of a potpourri overview of a lot of different things. We have a couple books about this that you can look at that describe some of the methodologies. They're not really aimed at macroeconomics, but you can, in some cases, they show the connection between it. And certainly you're welcome to look at that, and maybe we can talk further about it. So let me just stop there, and maybe there's some questions and so forth. I know that was a lot quickly.
Yes, we'll have questions for the discussions sessions later. Please give a big hand to Dr. Pentland. Yes, thank you very much for shedding light on how advanced analytics can shape effective policies. Thank you once again. And now I would like to introduce our discussant, Dr. Byung-Gyu Kim, an assistant professor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, specializing in data science and international political economics. Please welcome him with a big hand.
Thank you. As kindly introduced, my name is Byung-Gyu Kim. I'll be discussing this wonderful presentation by Professor Alex Pentland about future of data and AI. My academic background is political science and statistics. And to be completely honest with you, I have not been following or closely following Professor Pentland's work. So today was an excellent opportunity or eye-opening opportunity for me to learn new things and interesting perspective, which is, I think, very important. And that said, I'll try my best to summarize Professor Pentland's work and introduce my questions here and there. I think the first theme in the presentation was called Economics and Networks. And the key idea is that our behaviors are governed by other people's behaviors, right? And that's I call it our behavior is not our own. And we typically take cues from other people. Professor Pentland gave an example of financial crisis, bank run, but we can easily extend this to more casual activities like choosing what to wear for the day. It depends on what other people at the same venue will wear. So these things depend highly on social networks, and I was surprised, as Professor Pentland said, that economic models don't typically account for this. And this is important because it matters, or social networks matters, in predicting economic trends and naturally in formulating policies that guide or regulate individual economic behavior. So if we were to introduce data science or AI to help formulate policies, then we must take into account the social network structure when training our AI for the policy. This leads to the second theme in the economics and networks, which is how social networks help predict the economic outcomes. And one example was the economic growth, the GDP growth. And yeah, economic growth is also shaped by networks within the social structure. So development should aim to promote ways to facilitate human interactions. And the example in the presentation was transportation between the cities and how a city without IT technology being connected to IT city suddenly becomes IT sophisticated. And here is my question there. Especially since the pandemic, we're now more used to interactions in the cyberspace. With the help of the technology, we had wonderful presenters and discussants joining us remotely, and we enjoyed these interactions. And I was wondering if or whether these interactions in the cyberspace would have similar economic effects as physical interactions. And now we move on to the second theme, which is new digital architectures. And this, I think, is based on this very important question. Who benefits from data analysis? Right? Data science is obviously on the rise. We hear this word AI on a daily basis, basically. But we rarely ask this particular question, and if we think about it, individuals who provide data often are not the beneficiaries. The commuting information, where we go, what we buy, are all data that companies collect to promote their sales and marketing plans, but it doesn't exactly benefit us, which betrays the fact that we're actually the owners of the data. So Professor Pentland's presentation touches upon, touches upon this very important fact, and I'm actually at the second sentence, by the way. And now moving to the third sentence there. So it relates to this important issue of privacy and copyrights being left in the gray zone in the age of AI. And it has a huge economic implications of data ownership and privacy in digital age, the area which I think Professor Pentland is an expert for. And this is what I understood from the presentation. So the question of how do we address this? And there was this important diagram called OPAL. I think it's a short word for open algorithm. And nowadays, people send data to data centers or companies for analysis. So these companies actually gather the data and use them for analysis. And the suggested solution is to change the roles such that the center node sends algorithms to individuals, and individuals use their private data to get statistics or results and send them back to the center for analysis. This way, data owners still keep the data without having to provide the raw data to the center node and keep their privacy. And here's my question. Algorithms we're used to, such as transformer encoders like BERT, or more commonly known ChatGPT, are the algorithms that we can send to individuals for analysis. But these algorithms are trained on a tremendous of data, and they didn't particularly ask our permission. So if you were to send algorithms for individuals to use, those algorithms have to be useful, and they have to be trained on individual data. So how do we address this fundamental problem is a question that I want to ask. And another important theme was the data auditing, where there's a middleman introduced in between the company or the users of the data and the data owners, which are the individuals. And my political science background forces me to ask this question. Who regulates or who monitors the middleman, and who monitors the monitors of the middleman, right? And this may be an important policy question as well, and this does not deny the fact that the presence of middlemen is very, very important in addressing the privacy problem that we just addressed. And here's a bit more, and with this slide, I hope to address not just this presentation, but the presentations that follow. Those talks address important technologies, how to utilize the data to help formulate policies. And we all know that data science and AI can help formulate policies and help economic growth. But these are not free. What I call data capability includes infrastructure that's necessary to run the data analysis, such as data centers, servers, cooling systems, etc. And there's a personnel with the training on data analysis in order to process the information, and there's also a problem of maintenance. And what's important is that the data capability is not equally distributed across the countries. Developed countries typically have this ability, and they can benefit from data analysis and AI, whereas for developing countries with less data capability, they can benefit to a much less extent. In recognizing this reality, I asked this question to the audience and to the presenters. What is the role of international organizations, such as World Bank, to bridge this gap? With this said, I conclude my discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for addressing your insights and also reflecting on the importance of our prior presentation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll proceed with our discussion and Q&A session. Please bear with us for a few minutes as we set up the stage for the next proceedings. And we encourage you to utilize this time to review the presentations or prepare for any questions or comments that you may have regarding to the prior presentations. Now, as soon as the stage is set, we would like to invite our speaker, discussant, and our chair. And let me introduce the chair for today. Professor Charles Liu is a professor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management who specializes in budgeting and public financial management. Dr. Liu will be acting as chair for all the discussions and Q&A sessions. So if you are ready, please take the stage.
Thank you for introducing me. Thank you all of you for joining this discussion session following Professor Alex Pendland's presentation, The Future of Data and AI. Actually, I really appreciate the discussion led by Professor Byung-Gu Kim. And now we're gonna make a discussion session for the presentation of Professor Pendland. But before we start the floor discussion, I think the presenter, Professor Pantland, may want to add some comments, or he may want to respond to the discussion or the comments or questions raised by Professor Byung-Gu Kim. So, Professor Pantland,
Yeah, surely.
do you want to respond to discussants, comments, and questions first?
So those are a number of good questions that address, I think, some of the most important points that, because of time, I didn't get to. The first thing is that a lot of the comments had to do with use of transformers and GPT type of technology. And we have a initiative to be able to address that. It's on the web. It's called transformers.mit.edu. But it includes a couple of things. One is a data provenance project, which attempts to resolve the problem of training these things on data that they don't own. So this is collecting and annotating data so that when people train these large models, they can adhere to copyright and ethical principles. And you should look at that and you should participate, because what we're doing is making an ethical training resource for the world. It's a huge, huge thing already. The second thing at this transformers.mit.edu is that a lot of this new technology is not configured for individuals or for communities. It's on the sort of Google model where, you send in data to the Oracle sends back answers, but now the Oracle has your data. And that's the primary way things are built today. But it's not the only way you can do it. So again, for the transformers, just as I talked about Opal, you can do sort of very general purpose AI in a way that is privacy preserving. And there's a couple papers there that get at that. And an important concept that I think wasn't brought up or wasn't seized on was the notion of auditing. You can now do provable auditing that's not very expensive. To ask, how were things actually done? Was it the right algorithm? Was it the data that you owned, and so on and so forth? So that you can have companies that are continuously audited by provably correct, strong algorithms to answer many of these questions. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. And the final thing had to do with cost, and the cost is decreasing, but it's non-trivial. More important is that most countries don't have the expertise to actually set up things like this on their own. And I think that's one of the things that the World Bank and similar institutions can certainly help with. We've been trying to set up open source, free software systems that allow any country to implement better tax systems, better trade systems, better social programs. So for instance, I showed you about being able to audit the social programs in Central America. And that was paid for by the Inter-American Development Bank. It wasn't from the country's treasuries themselves. Some of those countries are not very rich. But what it did is it helped them do a much better job at social services. And so I think that there's a number of sort of conventional type answers that have to do with multinationals helping to produce common platforms that other people can use. And that has the advantage also of interoperability. One of the key elements here is that if you can actually interoperate with people, in other words, you can trade with them, you can share with them and so forth, then that gives you the ability to learn how to do things better. But it all depends on interoperability. And I think that's a place where the World Bank could play an especially good role, as this sort of public software for countries everywhere in the world and help at actually building these. And the question of the cost is actually I think in many ways likely to be not something that is important because, like for instance, the example with the social systems, that was actually a savings program. The cost of it was very small to the cost of the program, and the fact that you could increase the fairness and reach of the program dramatically through the analysis meant that the service at the same cost, the service to the citizens was much better. And of course, I think that's a reasonable principle, is not to try and spend extra money, but to spend money smarter. And in some cases, these systems can definitely do that. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. And in this room, we have many participants, and especially we have many students from KDIS-World and Public Policy and Management. So to encourage more dialogue, we are now opening the discussion to the audience. So, is there anyone who want to make a question or make a comment or discussion? Feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so at the back, we have one gentleman.
Good afternoon and thank you. I mean, in the present scenario, in the disruption era, we are now moving in terms of policy. From a contemporary way of subjective approach. Now we are moving towards the quantitative pathways. In a sense, like the theory of change is shifting towards a quantitative strengthening in terms of policy landscape. In such course of time, I think like the professor has clearly mentioned regarding the ethical consideration. So to me as well, I have a concern regarding the ethical consideration, not as an individual, but at the decisional level. In a sense, we have the decentralization ecosystem of decision. In that process, like how we can engage, in such a disruption era, how we can engage the local citizenry, in a sense, how we can ensure the inclusivity in the decision-making process, the policy decision-making process, using that AI or any disruption. Since in many cases, especially in LIC, the low-income countries, the digital literacy is in concern. So in the process of having that holistic kind of policy development, how we can ensure our consensus orientation, the 10%, the consensus orientation in the policy making process.
So this is a great question. The answer that we've been recommending or working on is through a very traditional mechanism, which is community cooperatives, community banks, community unions, these sort of community organizations. So the way to think about this is that, we have things like banks, community banks, for helping people manage their money. We have labor unions to help people manage their work conditions. And what we need is data unions, essentially, to help communities manage their position relative to the data economy, which means a lot about the use of AI. And in almost every community, I remember when we lived in India, you'd go into these very poor communities, but there were some people who were quite sophisticated in almost every community. And when they set up a community, a cooperative for commerce or farming or whatever, those more educated, more sophisticated people would typically be at the center of those sort of things. So that's a very traditional way to move forward. And that's the sort of thing that you see in countries like India, for instance, that have a strong cooperative tradition. You know, I think that things of that sort can be maybe not the whole solution, but 80% of the solution. And then, of course, the other thing is that what people are taught in schools, the sort of literacy, is changing. I'm not sure you need to understand trigonometry the way you used to have to learn it, or some of the other things, but it would be pretty good to have people have a little bit of experience with these sort of computer tools. And the best instance I know of is Costa Rica, very small and not a very rich country, which mandated computer experience for all of its children some 30 years ago now. And as a consequence, it's a very literate society, and they've been able to attract a lot of the sort of high-end IT industry. You know, Intel has a fab plant there, for God's sake, right? And so you know, there are ways of doing this, but I think that the first step is probably through cooperative ownership and cooperative means of dealing with these things.
Professor, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I have a question. You had presented a very inspiring way to predict year-on-year economic growth for each neighborhood in Beijing based on the human interaction. I wonder whether you have any experience to using similar methods maybe for predicting you know, government revenues. My assumption would be that, you know, maybe you can track consumption patterns and, you know, some of the major
Absolutely, yeah.
taxes. So I wanted to hear from you whether you have done any work in that area. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we've done a lot with, well, not just GDP growth, but what particular stores and amenities will be prosperous in what situation, and how can you improve their outcomes. And this was very important during the COVID pandemic, because you wanted to be able to know which places were going to be more resilient. You wanted to know which things were going to be most impacted, what policies would help you best. And I think that this is it's an important area where you can begin having these community-based policies based on these advanced IT techniques, but again, without having personal data. So just simply elaborating, I mean, the recommendation that we have is that by simply elaborating your existing census data, you know, which is neighborhood by neighborhood, to include interactions, you know, transportation, workplaces, things like that, you can do a huge amount of what you'd like to do along the lines that you just said. And we have a number of papers on that.
Thank you very much, both of you professors, for this timely and interesting presentation. Maybe my question is more directed towards Dr. Kim for his political science background. And I think you shed light on the gap between countries in terms of accessibility to data and maintaining the data. So I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more on from a global perspective, now that we're seeing some conflict or some disagreements between, for example, social companies and governments. But also, I would think, you know, like the gap that you referred to would also impose some, maybe that data would be used for some political uses, which can be sometimes harmful to the people who are the generator of these data. So I wonder, you refer to World Bank as organizations who can oversee all of this, but what are your thoughts, and how can we also, as owners of this data from the initial place, contribute to the protection of our own rights? Thank you.
Well, let me just add two things. So one is, you know, I help forge the Sustainable Development Goals, and part of that is control of data in a census-like way. So data about neighborhoods, not personal data, and been able to show that you can do a large amount of sort of precision government, as it were, that way, without endangering personal privacy. You can, of course, have policies that are bad for different segments of the society. That's I think sort of unavoidable. What I was talking about with cooperatives was not banks in the way you probably think of them, but community banks owned by the citizens and run typically in a democratic way by the citizens. And these are very common all around the world. Agricultural co-ops, cooperatives in particularly in poor areas where people have banded together. And one of the consequences is it gives them more political power because they know themselves better, because they speak for the group of people, not just for themselves. And so historically, labor unions, agricultural banks, things like that, have been very important in reforming government. So I just think that that's a practical path forward, although obviously there's other things you can do.
If I could add a little bit to that, I think what Professor Pentland addressed today in his presentation actually touches upon very important points, where there's this middleman that addresses the privacy problem, and that may address how data is monopolized by a few select companies that work to promote their own benefits instead of the data owners. And as for the unequal distribution of the data capability and how developing countries can harness the benefits as well, I think Professor Pentland also mentioned about this public software that are distributed to the countries so that they can use for data analysis. And when I was formulating this question, I was actually thinking about World Bank providing some training to key personnel in each country. We had several guest speakers at KDI-School from public sectors, and they're all data science specialists. They all complained that there's not enough people who can read data. So they send data to companies in South Korea for analysis, they get the results back, and the public workers cannot understand the results. So they're desperate in training these personnel to be able to at least literate in data. And I think if this is the case for South Korea, this can be a case of many other developing countries as well. So there's a worldwide demand for these specialists in data analysis. And I think international organizations can provide or connect those countries to experts in developed countries to provide necessary educations and training so that they can go back to their countries and use them for their own, in their own context and policies.
Okay, thank you very much. Because of time constraint, I think we have to conclude this session here. But Professor Pentland, if you want to have, if you have any final remarks or observation, then you can feel free to share what you're thinking. But
I think the only thing to add is that we're very interested in helping countries, become more skilled in data analytics for public interest. And I think that the World Bank really should be doing programs in this area, and we'd be happy to help. So thank you all for inviting me, and I hope it was useful for you, and we'll talk to you again later sometime. Take care.
Okay, that was a very productive discussion. Please give a big round of applause to our chair, speaker, and discussion for the excellent presentation. Thank you once again. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we can use a short break to cool things off a bit. Coffee and refreshments are prepared outside of the lobby, so please do enjoy. And the last session will proceed at 10:50 a.m., so please be back by 10:50. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back and hope you enjoyed your break. Now let us begin our last session of this workshop. In this session, we would like to take this opportunity to share presentations on AI and big data. We are very delighted to be joined by presenters from different ministries in Korea and the World Bank. And our first speaker is Mr. Chung-Pil Park, head of the Digital Strategy and Data Governance team at the Bank of Korea, discussing on AI and big data in central banking. Please welcome with a big round of applause. And please use your simultaneous interpretation service receivers as Mr. Park will be delivering his presentation in Korean. And please tune in to channel 2.
안녕하십니까. 저 한국은행
Good
디지털
morning, ladies and
혁신실
gentlemen.
혁신기획 팀장
I am
박정필입니다.
Chung-Pil Park from the Office of Digital Innovation at the Bank of Korea.
이런 귀중한 자리에서 한국은행의
Thank you very
AI 및
much for
데이터
inviting me
활용
to this
사례를
very
발표하게
prestigious occasion
대단히 기쁘게
to present
생각합니다.
on AI at the Bank of Korea.
디지털 혁신실은 지금 현재
The
한국은행에서
Office of
제일
Digital Innovation
마지막에
at
생긴
the Bank of Korea
조직인데요.
is probably
2020년이 저희 한국은행
it's
창립 70주년이었는데
2020 was our 70th anniversary of the BOK, and we're probably the youngest of departments at BOK. BOK's 2030 vision was announced during that anniversary occasion, and one of the key objectives was to really harness digital.
데이터 거버넌스 조직으로
And
디지털 혁신실이 생겨서
The Office of
현재까지
Digital Innovation was established back then for data governance and digital innovation, and it's successfully up and running.
목차는 일단
So this is the table of contents.
이제까지 AI와 빅데이터를 관련한
With regard to AI and big data, there were some projects that were executed at BOK. So I would like to share that with you, and also some key use cases, a total of 3. And for the past 3.5 years, I would also like to share with you some of the takeaways and some of the lessons we've learned. What you see here is a summary of the AI big data related projects at the Bank of Korea. And it goes back to 2017 when we started to use this technology, but the issue back then was that most of the research did not really have sufficient data, or it was a specific unit or researcher that was motivated to conduct that project. So it wasn't bank-wide, basically. So the relevant data or the codes were not shared in a systematic fashion back then in 2017. So it wasn't actually accumulated as an asset of the BOK. However, ever since we've established the Office of Digital Innovation, we put together what we call KDIS. It's a digital sharing platform. So the assets, the codes are shared on this data analytics system so that it can be reused, that it can be utilized. So we now have a more of a systematic approach. And if you refer to some of the projects in bold, these were some of the projects that were pursued by the office. And a common denominator amongst these projects is that after these projects are completed, the relevant data and code would be shared on KDIS so that anybody can use this data. And KDIS is an acronym for BOK Integrated Data Analytics System, for your information. And there were basically 3 use cases for BOK in the area of AI and ML. So it's about identifying risks in economics, or the markets would be one. And the second is to make decision-based information-based decisions, and economic indicators are key. And when we do make our decisions, and we utilize AI and ML in that process. And the third has to do with raising work efficiency. So in the case of micro risk and systems risk, well, this is something that's still underway. So I think that it's a bit too hasty to present on our efforts, but especially when it comes to analyzing economic indicators and utilizing Gen AI. The chatbot is a very instrumental project, so we would like to share that with you. So this is GDP nowcasting. I'm sure that you're already aware already at FRB has been utilizing the dynamic factor modeling, or DFM. It was, of course, suspended during the COVID-19. However, there were nowcasting results that were announced and presented. So it's an econometrics model, but what we did was actually add AIML to that to actually find a way to utilize this in a more effective fashion. So ever since COVID-19, the central banks, one of their concerns was that they were very much focused on analytics in their, or in statistics in their analytics. However, there is a timely issue, a timing issue, and that's why big data can actually be used in this process to enhance the timeliness. And nowcasting enables us to receive real-time data in order to upgrade our estimates. And econometrics model is something that central banks do prefer, but we have added, as mentioned, an AIML layer to it so that we can enhance the timeliness of our estimates. So DFM model of FRB New York. So this was customized to befit the circumstance and context of Korea. So if you refer to the data, you can see that the GDP is a quarterly indicator, a quarterly statistics. So not only quarterly variables, but also 29 monthly variables would be utilized. And this is divided into 4 categories or 4 blocks. And in terms of the forecast, if we move on to the next slide to maybe provide you with a diagram of how this works. So this indicates that from 1 month prior, you can see that AI utilizes information to make quarterly estimates. And of course, information, there is a time lag. So every time we get new information every Friday, the data would be updated and our estimates would change or be modified. So you can see that in the case of the third quarter of 2020, we get the results or the data by the end of October. So you can see that AI gets this data and engages in forecasting. So what happens is it starts 1 month prior and ends after 1 month. So if you refer to the screen over here, you see the graph, and this indicates the nowcasting. So the dark blue is the pure DFM model. The purple is LSTM, so it's utilizing deep learning or machine learning, and this is the estimates. And gray would be the ensemble between the two, the DFM and the LSTM. And you can see that every time every Friday when the data is updated, you can see that there are specific factors that would impact the estimates, and that's actually visualized to see what factor led to what changes. In the case of May, for instance, you can see that, well, gray is international trade, and you can see that due to international trade, it dropped. So you can see that these factors and AIML, some people would say that this is a black box and it would be a bit difficult to use in policy. However, what we tried to do was make it as transparent as possible to understand which factors have impacted a change in the estimates. In 2021 and onwards, we've been having this system in place, and we've been using this system, and the objective basically would be 2 here. As mentioned, it's about timeliness of the estimate or the forecast, and the second would be to improve the accuracy of the forecast. And in terms of the accuracy, I think that it is actually contributing. However, if you think about AI and big data, it's about receiving timely information. So to understand a swift change in trend definitely has made our work better. So you can see here during COVID, the AI ML model, you can see that if there aren't that many changes to the times, then you may not really see the value. However, if there's a major change of the times, it does have value. So you see here, it was during COVID-19 when we have seen a great contraction of trade. And the first quarter and second quarter of 2020, that was when that data was not put it into the system. So it was until April when we were able to get the data. And you can see here from the end of January, you can see that there was a dip in the numbers. And then if you look at the bottom panel, this is upon the rebound. And once again, you can see that it goes up. In the third and fourth quarter 2020 in July, you can see that already there were some signs of recovery in July.
다음은 이제 최근 이건 정말 따끈따끈한 건데
So this is very recent, just out. So it's been less than a month since we've completed this model, so it's just right out. And this is a similar concept with the GDP nowcasting. It's for inflation. So this we don't use a DFM. It's just AI and ML that's being used for this system. And the key objective here is when you do forecast, you do have an estimate. But as you know, the data that you can use will, of course, change. And when you do want to model, it's not like we have all of the data in the same fashion. It's not stationary. Depending on that point in time, the data would differ. So you can see that this is about building a data pipeline so that we have vintage data at whichever point in time. So this is the real-time inflation forecasting upon a data pipeline. And what we would do is engage in a factor modeling, a factor forecast, and based on that, you can see how we can drive the output. But what's different from the GDP nowcasting is that, as mentioned, it utilizes DFM as well, and it would go into, within the modeling, engage in the calculation or calculate the contributions. But here, in the case of AI and ML, you can see that this is a simulation that that data does not exist. So I do want to once again emphasize that this is not based on a DFM model. It's just purely using AI and ML. So yes, of course, we utilize the ML technique. And so here, you can see that the forecast, the target variable is year-on-year CPI growth, and the data set was 298 data sets that we used in 10 categories. And of course, there were some questions as to whether with more variables would it raise the accuracy, but I think that this has to be tested out further. And also with regard to the effectiveness of alternate data sets was also something that we wanted to study. So 298 data sets were divided up into 7. And you can see that we have A, that includes all, and A dash includes alternate data sets, and we have B and C. And we looked into the category balance and also how frequent it was used in previous studies. So it was based on category level and the frequency of use in previous studies. And you can see that the data vintage would be generated automatically based on these 298 data sets, and this would go into the data platform where all of the researchers can refer to. So basically, it was an ensemble model where it was a tree-based machine learning methodology and a linear regression. It was an ensemble model. So the tree-based machine learning model. So this indicates that any data can be used. That's the greatest advantage of this. And then linear regression. Of course, it's easy to make assumptions, to analyze and interpret, so that helps. And especially in the case of linear regression, when you do not have sufficient data, it does outperform over other models. So we think that this could be quite complementary. So the linear regression model utilized only 14 key predictor combinations. And then you can see that we've actually compared this with the ARIMA model and the RW model to benchmark the model. When it's an ensemble model, especially if we use a C dash data set, we've seen high accuracy, and internally that can be controversial because typically we think that with more data sets it would be more accurate. But C dash was identified as more accurate, so we will have to study this further. But at any rate, this model, when we did use this in the past, what would have been the result? So we wanted to look into that. So this is the year-on-year CPI growth in Korea. So you can see that there was a change in the trend. It was October of 2020 and July of 2022. And if we have actually used this model, we wanted to look into what kinds of outcome would have been generated. So let us now move on to that next slide to see that. So if you look at this, you can see that when it rebounded, you can see we do look at this in quarterly, well, 3 months, 1 year basis. So you can see that there it was slightly stagnant, and in 3 months' time, you can see that there was that slight rebound, and then you can also see the factor analysis on that. And then in the case of 2022, you can see that it has anticipated that dip. And then this was when we first ran the model for the very first time. And at that time, the forecast was 3.73. However, it was 3.8. So you can see that compared to the actual, it was not that bad. But a couple of days ago, we saw this drop from 3.8 to 3.3, but then the forecast was 3.4 through this, and the survey was the estimate was 3.7. So you can see that if there is some subjective judgment that goes in, as in the survey, which actually forecasted 3.7, this model was more accurate. And then this is on AI chatbot. So we have ChatGPT, and we also have other different AI models, but due to data privacy, we cannot, of course, connect on the internet to utilize the existing model. So we have been trying to introduce an internal model, and one example would be this AI chatbot. And because we are a policy institution, if AI provides inaccurate information, this could lead to major ramifications. So we've been very much focused on minimizing that risk. And our foundation model, that language model, of course, due to the lack of resources, we cannot actually build something like that from scratch. And we wanted to make sure that we can use this for finance and economics. And fine-tuning, of course, would be required. So we wanted to really internalize the model so that it fits this demand. And we also would have to make this as an internal skill and capacity. So at the Bank of Korea, we do have a lot of silos amongst our departments. So what we wanted to do here was to have all of the units disclose their information and documents so that this can be accumulated as training data. So this actually helps us bring down the silos amongst the departments. So you can see that there's 2 AI that would go in. So we have the query data, the engine, the search engine, and then Gen AI, based on the query results, the search results, would be giving us the output. So we really wanted to minimize any hallucination that can take place. Typically, it's the RAG model, the Retrieval Augmented Generation model. So you need at least 2 AI engines that would go in. And the DB, the database, is currently being built for internal documents. And in the future, would be the encoder model. This is a very small-sized model, so we can actually develop internally. However, in the case of this encoder, the retriever, we're actually working this out with Seoul National University. And in the case of ChatGPT, it's about engaging in domain adaptation of an already existing open-source model. And we, of course, refer to many graphs, and that has to also be recognized. So with the University of Sydney, we're looking into developing a multimodal model. And you can see that it's currently only used within the departments. And this is an example of identifying some information on the regulation. So if you actually place this prompt, there are actually 2 output that you can get. One would be a summary, and another would be to just get the reference and a summary. So right now we've named this Boksiri. It's a tentative name for this AI chatbot. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the Bank of Korea is BOK, Bok, and then Siri, as you know. So we will actually just combine the 2. But then I don't know if you know, but Boksiri is typically a name for dogs, for puppies in Korea. So our AI chatbot and our avatar is actually a dog. It's a puppy. And we're thinking of maybe changing this to Manager Kim. I don't know what will happen, but the tentative name is Boksiri right now for this internally developed AI chatbot. I don't think that I have a lot of time, so let me just go into the three takeaways. So AI, ML, here it's not just about just having the model. You need the algorithm, you need the data, and you need the computation, and you also need the vision as to how you're going to use this in the future. So you really need to take a strategic approach. And for us, in 2020, as mentioned, with the office established, we had that opportunity to add the assets bank-wide. So that's, of course, quite fortunate for us. So the initial questions that we had was, what do we want to do with AI ML? So introducing AI in itself was not the objective. This was a tool, and what we wanted to do was really enhance our policies and our policy suggestions and research. So that was our objective by using AI as a tool. So AI in itself wasn't the destination. It was about what we should internalize and what we utilize from the shelf. So we had to make that strategic decision. So in order to make the investments, we first have to understand our capabilities right now. What are we able to do at present? But well, most of the central banks are very well versed in analytics and data analysis. But I think AI ML is at a slightly different angle. So it's true that central banks are data analysts, but are they data scientists, and are they well versed in using new types of data? Well, this is, I think, a different domain. So in some sense, we do need some external resources to really fill that gap, meaning that we need to hire the right talents for data science. And typically, thinking of AI and ML, it's really at a boom. It's highly popular, so it's very difficult to actually attract the right talents because they're very expensive to hire these days. And we speak this over with the Central Bank of England, and we asked how they acquire talent, and they said that it's very difficult for them as well. We were saying maybe if under a recession we may be able to hire talents. Of course, it's not something a central bank should say, but half jokingly we did say that, just indicating how difficult it's to hire talent. And what we want to do is not reinvent the wheel. It's about internalizing what we need, and if there's something out there, we want to, of course, utilize that. So from 2021, this was the past footsteps. So starting from the plan. So we built that plan for the infrastructure, put together the strategy, and we have a 3-year data platform type of plan project underway. And we have a portal for our data platform, and we have the data catalog, which will help you search and query, and then we have the big data lake, and then we have the data lab, the environment for AI and ML analytics. And next year, when we do complete the data lab, this project would be completed. So if you think about the current phase, this is a chart by MIT in understanding the maturity of technology. So our objective view of our current stance is that maybe we're between level 2 and 3, somewhere between the two. In terms of the technology, it's of course on track based on plan. However, culture, human, this element is something we believe is lagging, and it's an area that we need to work on. So the second takeaway is that, well, digital innovation involves not only technology but human factors. So humans really matter. And I typically use this analogy where AI, if you think about this as wizardy, you may think it's irrelevant, so you wouldn't want to use it. If you think about, Harry Potter, if it's wizardy, well, it seems quite distant. However, AI and ML, these tools are, well, I don't know what will happen in the future, but we really need to change that mindset that these are scientific tools that we can utilize. So we really need that change in perspective. So data literacy and digital literacy programs are something that we're very much interested in and we're trying to build. And it's about going into new domains. So it's quite unlike a very conservative central bank. So you need a new working method and mindset to really utilize these innovations. And in the future, when we do deploy AI, responsibility is very important as a policy institution, whether it be AI or ML, AI governance and responsible AI would, of course, be paramount. So when we do introduce a new system, and the reason why we have this Office of Digital Innovation in the first place was because we really wanted to increase our pace. The IT strategy department, the existing department, was more of a marathoner that looks into long term, but for us, we're like a sprinter to really be very agile and really promote swift change. And what's most important at the end of the day is collaboration. In some sense, AI and big data and the introduction of this technology, you can see that it's an area that would actually help us expand the realm of central banks. But as mentioned, we, the wizards, human beings have different language, so collaboration is key. And we really wanted to really focus on further collaboration and communication. However, it really did not work well. So this office, the Office of Digital Innovation, really has this, one-on-one type of relationship where we actually have this office consist of half technology staff, half central bank expertise staff. So I think that this type of composition does work. And at the end of the day, data is most important, the last takeaway. And we, of course, as you know, data security is key for a central bank. So there are some limitations, but you need to take this into consideration when devising your strategy. And data governance, I think, is still important, especially in the area of in the era of big data. And the biggest challenge has to do with the lack of data, of course. And we're doing our best to collect data, but there are copyright issues. There could be a number of hosts of challenges, so it's very difficult to actually accumulate as much data as possible. So especially for structured data sets, it's quite set. So it's only some. It's in terms of what you can collect, it's already decided. So it's very difficult to use this as big data. But we're especially interested in high-frequency trade data to collect that as well. And we have a project right now on collecting that data. But if we want this to be successful, we need data lab to make sure that we can process this real-time high-frequency data. So we do have prototypes, but we're still working on constructing that data lab. And I think that rather than introducing an AI model, actually accumulating that data set is more of a challenge. In the past, we just had these data in files, not thinking of really using this to train machines. However, now we have to change the format of that so that we can use this as training data. So we're trying to convert our internal documents right now. So we actually have to work on the format of how this should be constructed so that this can be used for these modeling. So this is actually a huge task at hand. So that's basically it for my presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Park, for offering a glimpse into the innovative strategies of financial AI and data program from the Bank of Korea. Thank you once again. And next, please welcome our next speaker, Mr. Anders Yoth Agerskov, a senior public sector specialist in fiscal policy and sustainable growth at the World Bank, speaking on application of AI in taxation. Please welcome him with a big hand.
Thank you very much. What I thought I would do is to go through a rapid fire examples of how AI and advanced analytics are being used in taxation. Because as you know, everybody talks about how AI will reshape everything, but exactly how? And these were some of the use cases I could find. There are a number of governance issues Dr. Park talked about, like hallucination, overfitting, and so on. I will not be going into them in this presentation. So one of the challenges the tax administration has is dealing with the shadow economy. It's this kind of gray mass of people that are informal, they could be peasants. From a tax organization's perspective, we only want to know about the people not paying taxes, right? Not the others that are below thresholds. So this company, IVIX, developed a piece of software that looks at different silos. So one can be construction sector, which I won't go through here, or it could be Airbnb. So in the case of Airbnb, they scraped all of the data from Airbnb. They took the name of the person who allegedly was the person who was renting out the property and the picture, took that information and matched against social media using AI. And then they claim to be able to match 90+%, right? Some early figures were around 70+%. Those of you that are used to working with automatic exchange of information data know that's pretty high. So basically, what it allows them to do, since for each property there is a rental fee per day, you can kind of calculate the amount of revenue. And they shared with us, this is about a couple of years old, the number of listings per country. So you can see Korea, 53,000. And then they match it with the tax administration's file, and then it drives into the whole issue around compliance checks. So you actually got data when you face the taxpayer, say, hey, you know, you've sold these different things. Can we have a talk? A typical space is prediction, and Dr. Park also talked about it. Here it's fraud and audits. I will say there are very few public examples of use of AI because governments, especially tax administrations, are not the sharing kind, right? And there are legal issues for that. But here you see a recall rate, and I'll not go into the technicalities. So in this case, they're looking at how many of the audits lead to a finding of a tax crime, right? So in this case, 89% of all tax crimes were predicted. So this is pretty high. It is actually so high that our own research unit doesn't just want to do AI because, we know it's going to work for predicting things like this. So it's not really interesting. But for those that are on the administration side, of course, it is interesting. There are other measures as well. Of course, you can develop an algorithm that predicts everything because it just selects everything, right? So everything is false positives, right? So we need to be working on massaging the model so it is not overfitted, but it gets a good number of positives and maybe a few extra that somebody didn't pick up. Here is work by Jean-François V in the World Bank. So he worked in Northern Africa, and this country had 118,000 customs transactions, and inspectors in 2018 found 201 imports with fraud. And his model predicted all 201 based on 16 and 17 data, so data from the 2 years before. And an additional 143 that were either false positives or detected by officials. Here's another example by our rock star Bob Rikers. So he looked at the assignment of customs officials, which has to be random, but he saw a long tail on the right side. So what happened was the customs officials went in and played with the IT system, so it was not completely random. So that was what it found out. What it resulted in is higher collection, which then immediately dropped, and then there were some further reforms, and then it picked up again. So it doesn't mean that if you have a result like this and you can pinpoint bad officials, that you necessarily in some environments get result, but it can happen if you are persistent. Missing trader fraud, 170 countries have VAT, and one of the biggest risks is missing trader fraud. That is basically you're claiming a VAT refund because you have bought much more stuff than you have sold, and what you do is then you just disappear. You take the money and it's really made up. So what the European Commission has done, and France, for example, is looked at this network. So think about each dot is a company, and then it's trading with other companies and so on. What you can do by using advanced transaction analysis, so let's say one of the companies is a bad company, but you have a supplier that only does business with that bad company, so it becomes guilty by association. So that is basically how this system works. Because in missing trader fraud, there's a whole series of companies that are doing trade with each other. So, and again, this is something that is leading to huge losses. So in one European country, we calculated based on audit findings that the losses were 0.4% of GDP. So it can be very, very substantial if you're looking into ways to reduce leakages. Here's another one, which is predicting tax arrears. Just to go through very quickly, Estonia, they were able to predict with 95% certainty the likelihood of a corporate taxpayer not paying taxes in the next month. The key issue here is they used monthly data rather than annual data, which is too slow in providing information. So artificial intelligence also means that you actually have to use your mind. You cannot just give it to somebody else. There's a lot of work with the model. Recently, the Turkish government contacted us and said, can you help us use AI for tax rulings? So tax rulings is you go to the tax authorities, say, hey, I have this problem. How do you really want to deal with it, right? And like you, we often throw this at ChatGPT and see, is there anything we can get out of this, right? So it drafted a tax ruling for the United States, assuming we were from there. And it identified, if you note about taxation of cryptocurrency, some of the key issues you need to regulate. So if you do some work for somebody and you get a Bitcoin, that's still payment. So typically countries go in and regulate that. If the currency is considered a property, if you receive, let's say you buy some Bitcoin and sell some Ethereum or whatever you do, that is considered a taxable event as well. So it identifies a number of these things like airdrops. Airdrops is kind of a marketing thing. Hey, we started this new cryptocurrency, we'll give you a little something to get started, right? Again, that is also income and you get taxed at that point. So it pulled this together, right? But if you don't know, it may not be exactly right? But it's a first start. Draft implementing procedures for assessment of advanced pricing agreements. So if you have two companies, one in a low tax jurisdiction and one in a high tax, you want to shift your profit to the low tax jurisdiction, through the arm's length pricing. And some companies have advanced pricing agreements where they say to the tax authority, look, we're going to price this thing we sell to our other branch this way, right? So we asked ChatGPT, so how would you do these procedures? And it basically says, first you need to find out whether the company is legible, la, 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 la. So again, it's a nice head start, but if you don't know anything about the subject, it can be dangerous. And this one I found particularly insightful. So I shot a part of the Turkish tax law to ChatGPT and said, can you find unclear provisions? And this is what it came up with. First, it found out that it was the Turkish tax law, which is nice. And it found a few concepts. So, for example, like tradesmen and artisans, what are those actually, right? You are referring to the Turkish commercial law, then somebody has to go and check that, right? So that's another problem. You're using a lot of examples, but they're not exhaustive, so that is a problem. You don't provide criteria for an exemption. General expenses, and you also have the, I think there's something on permanent establishment, so if you're involved in international tax, you know that is a very difficult concept, right? So that is what it found out immediately, and just imagine you take anything you have, tax law, other law, you can basically throw, these questions at ChatGPT. So there are many other use cases. For some reason, projecting revenue hasn't really been a hot thing. Limited effectiveness, more to short-term revenue projections. Maybe it will change with new algorithms. By the way, algorithms also improve over time. It's not just Moore's law about getting more transistors and faster chips. It's also the algorithms that are improving over time. Another example, we had somebody from an African tax administration come to a consulting firm that had developed an internal solution. So this African tax administration had hired 2,000 people to digitize forms, unstructured forms. The consulting firm had developed an internal solution that used AI to figure out where on the page different data was and pre-populate the database, speeding up the process 20-fold. 20-fold. So that means that this African nation, if it had known about it, could save the hiring of 1,900 people. There are other things. Interesting thing is modeling different taxpayer behaviors. So some consulting companies have done that. So you can have a belligerent taxpayer, or you can have a taxpayer that's not educated, and you can use those. You can ask ChatGPT to give different personas to people that it draws up. So, for example, I asked ChatGPT to draft a case. A tax case. So a guy had his home computer, expensive one, and he went to Europe for an international conference. And he said it was tax deductible, And the administration said no. So you can make him more belligerent, you can create more challenges in a case like this. Good, so where is this headed? As Dr. Park mentioned, data is one part. That's a whole different thing we haven't talked about. There's algorithm, and then there's a third thing, which is around transaction systems, like central bank digital currencies, blockchain, and all of that. So that will also change a lot because you can build functionalities into these systems. But that's not what we are talking about today. So under the banner of there's more to tax than tax, what are some of the insights? So one is when companies report withholding taxes on their employees or company earnings, they get a kind of a live view of the state of the economy, right? So again, go back to the 170 countries that have VAT. That's a snapshot of their entire formal economy. I know there's an informal as well, but you can use that for economic surveillance. I mean, you can see COVID, what happened to the SMEs. You can say, well, we introduced new policies to support the SMEs. Did it have any impact? Are they growing, right? So again, you can do a lot with that. You can also use technologies. Sandy didn't talk about it, I think, on like OPAL. So the problem with tax data is it's confidential. They're not going to give it to you. But you can put a layer in called OPAL, Open Algorithm. So you ask at software layer your question, and you get your answers back because you don't want to get the detailed data anyway. You want the big conclusions, right? You can potentially do this. And if you wanted to be a very transparent government, when you had a new reform proposal, you can put your algorithm with the links to OPAL, and then stakeholders could run their own modeling. Just saying. Also, some countries have used tax data to enable creditworthiness assessment. So for example, if I want to get a credit card, I can say in Norway, for example, dear tax administration, please let MasterCard know, some key data from my tax records. The benefit is I don't have to go and find them and photocopy or whatever, scan them in. And it's faster. It saves time also on the banking side, and it reduces their risk exposure, and overall you can get a better product, right? It has been used to identify beneficiaries that are not eligible to get a government program because they have too high salaries. So Sandy did a project in Chile where they found about 1 million beneficiaries that were not eligible by that kind of matching. And also the last example I thought was kind of funny. Australia used tax data to identify people at high risk of COVID. So how did they do that? They took people that had a job as nurse and Uber driver. Yeah, right. So it's also about understanding your data, and what we're finding is many tax administrations just don't understand their data. So again, to Dr. Park's point, more work needs to be done there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Agarskov, for exploring the ways of AI reshaping the taxation of fiscal policy. Thank you very much. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Mr. Kang Yong Lee, Director and Head of the Digital Strategy Team from Korea's Ministry of Science and ICT, delivering a Digital Bill of Rights, and he will be delivering in Korean. So please use your receivers and tune into channel 2 for English. And please welcome him with a big hand.
Yes, as introduced, I am Kang Yong Lee from the Ministry of Science and ICT. I'm from the Digital Strategy Team. Oh, it's a great pleasure to be a part of the workshop co-hosted by KDIS and World Bank, and thank you very much for this opportunity to introduce Korea's policies. KDI, not only for government agencies, but it's an area where civil servants really go to study and research. And the various research results of KDI school actually is very much productive and contributes greatly to government policy. So KDIS is a quite familiar agency, and I recall it was March where there was Korea Digital Days at the World Bank where we've introduced our digital policy, and I do know that next year we're probably going to have a similar event of its kind. So once again, it's a great pleasure to be at the presence of our wonderful colleagues. And let me give you a brief introduction of the team. With the new administration last May, we were in charge of crafting the digital strategy for the Republic of Korea, and it was announced in September. And you can say that the core of the digital strategy of Korea is the Digital Bill of Rights. And it's been about a year and a half where our team, put together the draft for the Digital Bill of Rights. And going forward, Korea will be redesigning the digital policy based on the Digital Bill of Rights going forward, and the team will be greatly involved. So I think that this presentation will help you better your understanding on the digital policies of Korea going forward. So this is the order of my presentation, the contents that I would like to cover. So in Korea, we call right now the era of deepening digitalization. So I would like to go into what kind of changes that we're seeing in the digital front, and also the journey behind crafting the Digital Bill of Rights. And I'll go into some of the key areas of the Digital Bill of Rights and some actions that are to be taken by the government going forward. So for the Digital Bill of Rights to be put together, it's important to first understand and analyze the context, the circumstance, and the environment. And as you are very well aware, as you know, it's not only digitalization, but it's digital transformation. And to go one step further, it's about deepening digitalization. And I'm sure that there is not a clear distinction amongst these phases. But if we do need to categorize, we can say that the analog and offline data and it being digitalized would be this first phase, which we call digitalization. And the next phase would be areas where digital technology actually helps and assists human beings to do things that were impossible or something that were very difficult to do. So we call this digital transformation. But if we move on to the phase of deepening digitalization, it's not just about assisting humanity. It's more than that. Digital in itself coexists with our everyday life, and this is what we call deepening, the phase of deepening digitalization. And in this new phase, there will be some policy actions that would be necessary for the government, and that was the background behind devising the Digital Bill of Rights by the government. And this is also a diagram that we often use to better the understanding of the audience. So we do have an existing order, and it could be the rule of law, it could be the legal institutions, it could be regulations, or it could be policies. It includes all of this. And in order to maintain a society, there are specific rules, and we call this order. And it's this existing order befitted the existing society, but with technological innovations and advancements, and based on these developments, you can see that if human beings make new attempts, and the combination of these attempts and technological advancement would lead to new innovations. And these new innovations would not be able to exist within the present order, and it may actually circumvent or go beyond existing orders. And in order to make sure that this can be somehow tolerated in our realms, we need a new type of order. And as you can see here, we have Gen AI, and Gen AI can be noted as the technological advancement. And with Gen AI, now human beings started to use this to maybe write new novels or there were new attempts made, maybe utilize this for job interviews. And once again, with the combination of these new attempts and with the technological advancements, there could be new issues that would emerge. We could have copyright issues. So, for instance, if it's an AI-based interview, can it be credible? So there were a host of challenges that also arose. And with the existing order, this in itself cannot be handled or embraced. And that's why the governments need to really think about a new type of order. And as mentioned, there was a major strike by the trade unions from Hollywood and amongst the writers and actors. And this was, of course, based on the concern for copyright and IP rights issues, and then AI interview as well. And in the case of the autonomous vehicle, if there is an accident, unfortunately, who would be liable? Would it be the manufacturer that would be held responsible, or should it be the software that drove that vehicle, or would it be the driver that was in that vehicle? So there could be a number of issues. And we believe that with the existing order, it would be very difficult to analyze or interpret all of these situations, meaning that we need a new type of order. So I believe that these will be the challenges of the so-called era of deepening digitalization that we do need to handle and respond to. Rather than go into the clauses of the Digital Bill of Rights, I would now like to go into the background and the journey, what kind of steps and processes we took to craft the Digital Bill of Rights. And I think that that would probably be more relevant for our audience today. So when we were devising the Digital Bill of Rights, we, of course, had to look into the tone and manner of the policy of the new administration. And also in this era of deepening digitalization, there are a number of challenges. So we also wanted to be mindful of that. And in addition to that, there is a specific ideal state and objective for future digital policy. So that was also taken into account. And the trends of international institutions and those from around the world, and also the views and opinions from the experts and stakeholders, our citizens. So as you can see here in this diagram, we had these 5 elements come into play in our development of the Digital Bill of Rights. So last year, the new administration came to its being, and the new president, in last September, we call this the New York Initiative, where at NYU, he announced this New York Initiative. So it was about the need for a new digital order. So that was highlighted in his remark. And then afterwards in G20 and in Davos Forum, and this year at the Sorbonne of Paris, the Paris Initiative was announced. So the need for a new digital order and to identify the direction for this new digital order and the digital policy of Korea was shared with many parties from around the world. And we also looked into the digital future as well. It took about 3 years for us, and major 9 associations that includes ICT, so a total of 9 academic institutions were in this together to research and study how digital transformation will play itself out in the future, and what the ideal state of society should be based on these changes. So along with these 9 academic associations and the ministry engaged in on this research, we call this megatrend research. And you can see that the future change would be basically in 4 directions. One would be platform, second would be automation, deepening, third would be personalization, and fourth was virtualization. So we identified in this project the 4 megatrends of digital transformation, and based on this, and amid these 4 types of digital transformation changes, what kind of society should we put together? So we've actually engaged in a scenario-based research. You can see here on the bottom where the x-axis has to do with innovation orientation, a stability-oriented type of society. And then the y-axis indicates how the benefits, whether it should be shared or whether the profits should be monopolized to a few so that they can utilize this for further improvement. So we have this graph put together. We engaged in public surveys, and we also sought out for expertise from experts. So based on this 4 mega trend, the society that we should pursue is what we call a digital society for shared prosperity. This seeks, of course, digital innovation, but it's about having a social system to make sure that the benefits are equally and fairly shared amongst all of the participants or the citizens. So the result of this research was that we need to find a way to introduce such type of society, and we were also very much interested in the analysis of global digital, of global digital norms around the world. So not only in Korea, but in EU, the US, and the UK, and also UN and OECD, these multilateral institutions were very much interested in these global digital norms, and we were able to see that there was very competitive discourse. And basically, we analyzed a total of 570 clauses on these digital norms. And we were able to identify some common values, common denominators, and some common principles. So we've been very much focused on analyzing all of these global digital norms. And the charters commonly included human dignity or human rights, accessibility to digital, or freedom of expression. So these were elements that we were able to identify that all global citizens really do aspire to have in place. But of course, depending on the policy stance of the country, the approach towards innovation and the issue of sharing the benefits were slightly different amongst different countries and institutions, depending on their approach and perspective. And when we're putting together the Bill of Rights, another key aspect that we really wanted to reflect was the social discourse. So as it's in the name of Digital Bill of Rights, it was about really setting the direction for a social rule, a new rule or order. So this is not something that can only be driven by the government. At the end of the day, it's about the residents and their views and comments that should be fully reflected in the Bill of Rights. And that's why, especially as you know, the MZ generation, for instance, the younger generation, their voices should be heard, and also the presidents of universities, and as mentioned, the 9 major academic scholarly institutions and societies, the scholars of digital domain, and experts of AI and AI ethics, and the CEOs of major companies were mobilized for 14 sessions to talk about what should be included in the Digital Bill of Rights. So we've had very in-depth discussions during these 14 on-site meetings. And we also shared this online via live streaming so that the citizens can actually chime in, share their views and comments, and also see what's going on. So this social discourse was a key area that we put in a lot of focus and efforts on, and we believe that it was quite transparent, the overall process. And as mentioned, based on the principles and visions of digital policy of the administration, based on our analysis of global trend and opinions from experts and stakeholders, we've set the vision of introducing a digital society for shared prosperity. And we decided to include the values, the trends, and issues and concerns of such society into the Digital Bill of Rights. So it was September of this year. So last September, the New York initiative was announced. So it was in a year's time where we went back to NYU to introduce and announce the Digital Bill of Rights and the contents. So the Digital Bill of Rights basically is about achieving our common vision of a digital shared prosperity society. It's basically a guideline that helps us introduce that type of society. And the Digital Bill of Rights consists of 5 key principles. The very first is freedom, second is fairness, safety, innovation, and last but not least, solidarity. So it consists of 5 pillars or 5 principles, which completes the Digital Bill of Rights. So in the beginning, I've mentioned about new digital order. It may include law, institutions, regulations, and policies. It's a comprehensive term that basically helps us run a society. And such a rule or such order in the era of deepening digitalization would have to be updated, revamped, or redesigned. And the basic direction of crafting this new digital order would come from the Digital Bill of Rights, as mentioned. So, the Digital Bill of Rights is actually a subtitle. The official name of the Digital Bill of Rights is Charter on the Values and Principles for a Digital Shared Prosperity Society. So we note this as charter, a charter officially. So this is the formal title of the Digital Bill of Rights. So it's noted in short as Digital Bill of Rights. And as mentioned in the US and UK, and in many multilateral institutions, there is a lot of discourse, conversations, dialogue on digital norms. And in the case of Korea's Digital Bill of Rights, well, there are some key characteristics. So if I may go into that, recently, the dialogue on norm is very much focused on the safety of AI or the ethics of AI. However, what we wanted to do was not only include the safety of AI, but also go into ways to enhance AI or digital literacy and also resolve the digital divide. So this, the Bill of Rights is a very encompassing type of charter that includes all of these aspects, not only on the ethics perspective. And then if we think about AI safety and norm, it's true that we may maybe lack some discourse on the growth aspect. It may be disregarded, but what we wanted to do was also focus on the importance of digital innovation and to make sure that the government provides the right policies and to enhance the efficacy. So once again, this is like a charter, and because it's a charter, in terms of its efficacy, to make sure that it's substantial and it's effective was a core focus for us. We really wanted to make sure that it can serve as a key guide for specific government policies, cases, and issues to enhance the efficacy, considering the declaratory nature of the charter. So we prepared a commentary guide to provide some more details. So it has a preface and a total of 6 chapters, and it consists of 28 articles. So a preamble, 6 chapters, and 28 articles. And the preamble indicates the vision that we have. And in chapter 1, it includes the 5 principles. And the individual principles basically have been introduced as a chapter of the charter. And this is the preamble of the Digital Bill of Rights. So as mentioned, it indicates that humanity is currently facing a major civilization-altering revolution. And amidst this change, the existing values of freedom, equality, and human dignity, in other words, all of these universal values of humanity needs to be safeguarded. And amid this digital transformation, a new dimension of norms to safeguard these universal values is the core focus, which is indicated in the preamble. And this new norm should, of course, have human dignity and human values on the base. And as a base, and it's about needing these norms for a new digital shared prosperity society. And it also indicates that the ROK, with the aspiration to become a model digital nation, invites global citizens to unite in building digital shared prosperity societies. So just like the preamble of a constitution, you can see that our Digital Bill of Rights also has a preamble that goes into the background and the reason why we decided to have this in place. And if I may give you some more details, just briefly, Chapter 2 is on guaranteeing the freedom and rights in the digital environment. So this, of course, has to do with guaranteeing digital access, the freedom of digital expression. And it also has to do with respecting digital diversity. And another aspect that we've been very much focused on is the last two. So even if we do see accelerated digitalization, there are of course those that do not want to go digital. So demand for non-digital alternatives is something that should be respected. And that's why this was included in Chapter 2. And as you know, in a highly connected society, you get tasks even when you're out of work or when you're out of office. However, there's also, as a right for humanity or human rights, guarantee of digital work and rest was also something that was clearly indicated here in the Digital Bill of Rights. And another principle is fair access and equal opportunities to digital. In the megatrends research, as you know, it's about increasing platforms that may lead to a monopoly of a few. Therefore, fair competition and also understanding that data is like a public asset, it's important to make sure that these assets are protected and accessed. In order for everyone to benefit from digital literacy is something that also needs to be enhanced, so that's why it's indicated here in Chapter 3. And you see here protection of digital assets, and I do want to mention that in Chapter 3, protection of digital assets is most important out of the clauses here in this chapter, because with the fourth industrial revolution, data would be the most important asset in this new economy. But then again, the value of data, how should that be evaluated? Well, this is a discussion that's not making much progress right now. So the data that AI trains on and the data that's generated by AI, will we actually attach a value, an economic value to this? If so, how will we measure this economic value? And how would trade be done on such type of assets? So this is something that we really wanted to encompass in the protection of digital assets clause. And then the next chapter is safe and reliable digital society. The fourth principle, so this has to do with ethical development and use of digital technology, response to digital risks, protection of digital privacy. And particularly, we have the vulnerable women and children, where we think that they really do need to be especially protected. So you can see that we do have a clause on protection of children and youths. And Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is on promotion of digital innovation based on autonomy and creativity. And in some sense, this could be about the role of the country and the government. So citizens and companies need to be provided with an environment to really try out new things, to attempt to challenge. So it's about freedom of digital innovation activities, and the government has the responsibility to provide support for digital innovation, improve digital regulation, and there could be conflicts that arise in digital transformation, and a conflict resolution in digital transition would be key, and that would be, of course, the role of the government. And to make digital innovation sustainable, well, Chapter 5 indicates what should be done by the government and the state. And last but not least is what's relevant for the global society. So what we want to do in creating this digital chair for prosperous society is, of course, the advancement of human well-being. If we want to live in a peaceful, in a prosperous world, in this digital society, we, of course, have to take into consideration the impacts on the environment, ecology, so that a sustainable digital society can be possible. And we also need to find a way to reduce the global digital divide, and AI ethics, AI norms, and all of the conversations at the end of the day is about introducing global digital norms. So cooperating in that regard to introduce such norms is indicated in Chapter 6. So as mentioned, the Bill of Rights is a charter, so it may lack specificity and it may not really seem relevant sometimes, but then I would like to give you some more information on this. If you refer to Chapter 6, it's about guaranteeing digital access, and Article 11 indicates the guarantee of digital work and rest. And I want to show you how this connects to actual policy. So for instance, we utilize kiosks these days, whether it be stores or restaurants. We see this environment change where you have to order by using these kiosks. And in these kiosks and this digital environment, we have the elderly or persons with disabilities that find it very difficult to use these kiosks. So we want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible for the entire population. So it includes training or education on how to use these kiosks, and also to introduce kiosks that can be used by persons with disabilities, or also type of kiosk for the elderly that also provides voice recognition services, for instance. So based on Article 6, you can see that the policies would look something like this, as you can see here on the left. And the right to disconnect. So when you are when you leave your office, you of course want to disconnect yourself from work. So Article 11 indicates the guarantee of digital work and rest, and you can see that in the future, in the Employment and Labor Act and many of the labor-related regulations, this article will lead to guaranteeing rest time for employees going forward. And in the same vein, I've mentioned that the data generated by AI and where AI models are trained on, copyright issues. This is a key issue, and Article 13 indicates protection of digital assets. And it's about making sure that these assets are properly protected. In the case of the Republic of Korea, the Ministry of Culture is focused on this topic, whether it be contents from AI. There are, I know, guidelines on copyright that are currently being devised by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And also here, you can see that if there is a accident for autonomous vehicles, I do know that up to level 3 of autonomous vehicles, the Ministry of Land Transport, or MOLIT, probably has a guideline on how to deal with the liabilities. So I know that that's in place. And also deregulation to encourage digital innovation, and also in Articles 23 and 27, you can see that there's also notions on the fact that we need to reduce the digital divide around the world, and relevant policies are currently being devised. So once again, the Digital Bill of Rights may be a bit abstract as it is in the Charter. However, the individual clauses can actually be reflected into individual policies. So there is that connect. You can see that there are these lines that would help us connect this into policy development. So now moving on to our follow-up actions, what we are to do with the Digital Bill of Rights. So this, once again, is the basic direction for this new era of deepening digitalization. And the Ministry of Science, ICT, is currently engaging in a survey with relevant ministries to understand the current situation. So to understand what kind of policies are in place amongst the ministries, and to see how well they are prepared for this new era. So based on this diagnosis, what we want to do is redesign the laws, the regulations, and the policies. So it would be a countrywide type of response, where we're going to put together a countrywide roadmap. And the plan is early next year to actually have this roadmap in place that can work on a national level. And I believe that digital norm related issues and challenges is not confined to Korea. I know that many countries are interested, and there are efforts underway, so including OECD and UN. What we want to do is actively take part in this discourse on global norms, and also spread and disseminate the values and principles we find key. And in November, there was the AI Safety Summit that took place in the UK, and it dealt with topics on safety, and I knew that there was a joint declaration that was adopted. And next year, a virtual AI Safety Summit would take place in Korea in May, and I hope that there will be some more progress made in the area of digital norms in May. So we'll, with the countries, host the safety summit. And then CFAR of Canada and the key think tanks of UK are also our key partners. And we have been engaging in much research with them already. And I want to mention that Digital Bill of Rights is not an end in itself. This is just basically version 1. There will be many changes to the environment and digital changes. And based on these changes, we'll continue on with our dialogue on digital norms. And it's an ongoing task and journey. So that was an overall presentation on the Digital Bill of Rights of the Korea and on the digital norms that we're very much interested in. And going forward, we will, of course, continue on to put in the efforts, and I would like to ask for your support and interest going forward in our policies. Thank you.
Please give a big hand. Yes, thank you very much for that insightful presentation introducing the digital initiatives proceeding at the Korea Ministry of Science and ICT. Thank you once again. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached to the final segment of today's event, the discussion and Q&A. Please give us some time to set the stage for the next proceeding. And we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments regarding to the presentations, please raise your hand and our staff will hand over the mic to you. And simultaneous interpretation service is provided throughout this event, so please feel free to ask any questions or comments according to your language. So now I would like to invite our chair and our speakers up to the stage for the discussion and Q&A. And if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, let us begin our discussion and Q&A session. So we started with Jung-pil Park, okay, who delved into artificial intelligence at the Bank of Korea, offering insights into how these technologies are transforming financial policies and economic forecasting. And then Anders Eggeskov explored the advanced technologies for taxation. He highlighted AI's role in enhancing efficiency in tax administration. Lastly, Kang Yong Lee presented on the Digital Bill of Rights. He emphasized the need to balance technological advancement with digital rights and digital orders, right? And now we're going to have the Q&A sessions and discussion sessions. As we proceed, I encourage all of you in this room to engage actively, bring your perspectives and questions to the forefront. So, is there anyone who will make a question?
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Anders. We discussed the uses of AI and machine learning in doing some sort of risk assessments for identification of potentially risky cases for taxation purposes. But at the end of the day, all taxation processes are legal processes where due process has to be followed and there has to be application of mind. And only after doing that will any assessment of taxation will stand the test of time and judicial scrutiny. But what I notice and the discussions around use of AI in taxation is that basically they restrict the technology to use for identification of cases. However, there's still a long way to go in culmination of a process into an event which can result in realization of revenue. So is there any way in which the advanced technologies can actually fill that gap? And if no, then do you think there is some change required in the judicial process itself of taxation so that it can be quicker? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. If I go back to my country, for example, we have used a lot of robotic process automation. And the Danish tax administration has decided that these processes do not involve the robot making a decision. So some jurisdictions have a clear point when a decision is being made or not, right? So you have to look into your legal system. The other thing I would say, having worked quite a bit with tax enforcement, is there's often a wide latitude in deciding what cases to open, right? And in taxation, profiling is good. Everywhere else, profiling is bad, right? So, so that needs to converge. And I think you could have AI and also just risk scoring, lead to more or less automatic opening of cases unless something looks weird. So the question is, would the last centimeter automation, would it really matter? Because maybe you want to combine some cases, maybe rather than dealing with them one-on-one, maybe somebody who's an expert is overburdened right now. So there could be a lot of different considerations. And if you are opening cases against 3 high-profile targets, you may really absorb all of the capacity for the department. So I think it would make sense to leave that to human discretion because it's still too complex. The value added is the risk scoring and having some idea, why did this taxpayer score so high?
Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is GV. I'm from Cambodia. Although I agree with you that the AI and machine learning actually contribute to the growth and potentially development of the country as well. As you can see, the implication in the taxation. But from yesterday's presentation of Professors Sang Hoon An, there's also one slide that states that it could also potentially multiply the trajectory of inequality. My question is, do you agree to this? If so, in what way, especially in the application of the governance? Thank you.
I think you raised your question to Agostov, right?
I would like to have heard Mr. Lee's answer to that one. I was just looking before stepping up here around volatility. Does the digital society makes us more volatile? So that means, for example, have a gig work. I work for a small fee, whether it's Uber or whatever it is, stuff like that. Does it make me more vulnerable? That's what I'm thinking about. The other one I'm thinking about is the winner takes all. So unless you're the top 1, 2, maybe 3 companies, you're not going to be profitable in certain businesses, right? Then was what was also discussed, which is with digital technologies, the workday never ends. So these are some of the challenges I think we all know. The question is, can we manage those risks, right? And I think for me, working on tax, I think it goes a bit beyond that. And maybe Mr. Lee would want to talk about this, but I think it's up to us to some extent, right? Would it fuel anti-Semitism or outrage against Muslims? Maybe, right? You've seen some of these things. Is that an inequality thing? Well, it certainly breaks down the social contract, right? So I think there are a lot of questions to ponder that you're also trying to deal with, Mr. Lee, in the Digital Bill of Rights.
Sorry, before we have the question, Mr. Lee.
Yes, the Korean government, when we were devising the Digital Bill of Rights, the initial discussions were focused on all of these digital changes that we are witnessing right now. these digital changes, would that maybe undermine the existing values? That was a concern that we had. So as was mentioned, there could be religious issues or political issues where there are specific values in place in society, but with the digital transformation or digital advancement, as it advances, we may be seeing monopoly in the economy for only the winners of the few that actually have the data. They're the ones that can control everything. And then the digital divide may be exacerbated. And if that's the case, this may lead to another type of discrimination in society, which of course we need to make sure that does not happen. So in the Digital Bill of Rights, we were really much, initially, very much focused on how that can be reflected. So as was in the question, at the end of the day, not only for Korea, but for global citizens, there are universal values that we all do share. And we have these ideals, and I believe that we're probably all in pursuit of those same universal values. And when we were analyzing the global norms, we were able to see that there were these common denominators, these common values. It's about freedom, and it's also about pursuing innovation, and it's also about solidarity to reduce and minimize discrimination and disparities. And it's true that these are values that we all do share. So we really wanted to make sure that that was quite evident in the Digital Bill of Rights. And going forward, whether it be law, policy, institution, and not only for Korea, but for other countries, when they do need to put in place the rules, we hopefully want the Digital Bill of Rights to also be a guidance.
And I think we have a lady.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon. My name is Helen. I am a student from KDI. And I have a question. It was really interesting to hear about the central bank in Korea and how they are implemented AI and specific machine learning models. And I think the advances that you had in part were due to the resources you have available. But in my case, I come from a developing country and we still have some limitations. So I would like to know if you have any suggestion for developing countries or those countries that are starting to implement AI. Thank you.
Well, yes, the resource issue is a very complicated and difficult issue indeed. So when it was last year when I found it very difficult to convince the higher level. So we've actually introduced a high performance system, but then of course the high level folks asked, why do we need this? We don't have enough data. Where are you going to use this? Why do you want to pursue this project? But if you think about resource, I believe that sometimes the supply may, in some sense, create demand. So there are many people that are interested that really want to try this out. But then, of course, there are realistic limitations such as resource. And it's true that we do see these hindrances. But resource is also about investment. So it's not something that we can just say. But if we just take the case of Korea or a Bank of Korea, for instance, we did this right now. But if we have about AI engines in our servers, and how this worked was initially like we started off with the small models like BERT. And so we first focused on adding use cases, including maybe analyzing the tone and text. So right now, these days, there are many features and functionalities. And I know that there are also AI models that you can test out at low data volumes. So in the case of BOK, initially, STT, or speech-to-text model, was what we first started off with. And it's not GPU that we use here. We just ran this with CPU, an internal model based on open source. And we tried that out first. And then afterwards, OpenAI introduced Whisper, so we've actually ran that as well afterwards. So as was mentioned in my presentation, in creating the foundational model, it's not something that can be done by the public sector. Because I actually I took part in the AI strategy workshop at MIT, and What's different here is that in many of the cases, technological advancement started off with research labs and academia, and then it expanded out and then scaled in the process of commercialization. However, AI is very different. It's a very different journey where it's about creating something huge, and then it's about users following suit. And one of the participants asked, how do you actually create the foundation model? A question was posed on MIT, but they said that no, we do not create foundation models. We just do domain modification. The GPU size developments like what OpenAI does is not something like they can do. So I've mentioned that there are areas where we need to internalize, and this is something that you need to decide for yourself. There are specific models that you can decide based on your needs. And in the case of the model that we introduced is a hyper parameter 13B model. So we can run to 13B. However, in the past, it was much smaller than that of what we've tried out. So what's most important is to justify investment, to make it a business case, and you need to internalize the technology in some sense, and there's a lot of trial and error that would have to occur. So our goal this year is to run an infrastructure that runs on 40B. That's our goal. But at any rate, yes, investment is very important, but internalizing the technology, the skills, and also putting together the right roadmap, I think is key, is to understand what are the milestones, what we want to achieve at what point in time. But of course, it's very difficult to make that business case because it's massive investments and there are realistic limitations, as mentioned. But based on my experience, I do believe that if you still do want to pursue this, you need small success stories, use cases, and you need to accumulate that.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dhananjay.
My question is to Mr. Anders. Actually, I am student of KDIS school this year, but now finished the masters, will be leaving and joining back at the Mumbai Airport Customs, where I was there for last 1 year also. And we found the spurt of smuggling cases in particularly 2022, maybe because there was a lull in 20 and 21. The smugglers may be filling their quota 22. At airport, it's not the tax collection, but the prevention of smuggling of the contrabands, particularly heroin, cocaine, highly valued drugs. These are smuggled, and also the gold. And we found the peak of the quantum seized and also the cases booked last year. And the major our areas of control were the profiling of the passenger. There were used to be body concealment, both on body, inside body, and also the baggage scanning. And the challenge was there were multiple channels of just escaping because the multiple agencies are working at the airport and we used to just run. Like in one case, we found that from the international side to the domestic side, they were throwing the smuggled goods over the half glass wall. Then we got it plugged. So my question is how AI, though we are using the technology partly there, but how, as per your experience in this regard, you may like to comment on prevention of the smuggling at the international airport of gold and narcotics. Thank you.
Well, why not? Let me tell you what I think I know. Just on gold, FBI did an analysis of the unit price of gold coming in and out of the US. So this is for scrap gold. So that is not pure gold. And the prices were all over the place. So it's like almost nothing, almost full, even higher than pure gold. So it looked like trade-based money laundering. So that's one thought. The second one is it depends on how the smuggling occurs. So for example, in Kenya, some years ago, 100+ containers developed legs and stepped out of the customs area. And a very smart guy who later became commissioner, who had a background, PhD, Sussex, did the analysis of container movement and saw that there were missing containers, right, that hadn't been processed. So I think you have to take your understanding of how the smuggling works and then try to find a code for it. let's say it's difficult if it's cocaine because you don't have companies saying we sell cocaine, right? But if you have other items, then linking customs information with tax information is, okay, it's great you're selling, you have this kind of profit, but where do you get it from, right? Where do you get your ingredients from? So beginning to match some of these things. What many customs agencies do, and you undoubtedly know about it, is they have risk assessments, right? Cigarettes is a typical thing that's a problem, right? Or alcohol, depending on the country. So I would say take some of these high-risk items, other things, and then have a brainstorming group. You can call us. We can throw some ideas on the table. Maybe there's one or two that you think, we hadn't thought about that, right? But you probably know more than we do. But there may be a thing or two we can add.
네, 발표 너무 잘 들었습니다. 좀 박정필
Thank you very much for the
팀장님.
presentation. And I have a question for Jungpil Park and Kang Yong Lee. Yes, and I recall Jungpil Park mentioned that building a foundational model is not something that can be done by the public sector. But in the case of Korea, Naver and just a handful of companies I do know are capable of building foundational models. But at the BOK, the Bank of Korea, as you pursue your AI journey, I believe that there may be companies that build foundational models, whether it be from home and abroad. So when cooperating with these companies that are capable of doing that, what would be your stance? What would be the cooperation strategy that you have with these companies? And then the chatbot part of your presentation I thought was quite interesting. Especially there's security issues, of course. So that's why I thought it was quite interesting. It would probably be very much difficult to realize. So I want to understand, how did you actually overcome the security-related difficulty and challenge? And I will have the very same question for Mr. Lee. So I would like to understand. I do not know whether it's directly related to the charter itself, but I want to understand what kind of stance or position does the government have in terms of working with these parties that can actually build these models? And if we do introduce a chat bot type of system, it is expected to, of course, increase productivity, of course. So I would like to understand, does the government have any plans to introduce something like a chatbot government-wide? Well, the questions I think that basically all connect. Now, we of course want to use ChatGPT, of course, but our infrastructure policy is that to connect with MS, you have to actually have the data on the Azure cloud. However, that's not allowed because of the data requirements from the National Intelligence Service, or NIS. So we cannot do anything utilizing an API. It should be on-premise. But in the very last slide, as was indicated, the top priority, of course, is data security. We do have these restrictions, and that's why we've been focused on internalizing or really building this on-premise. However, with regard to AI, there's something that I do want to mention that there is no misunderstanding on, where if you think about Polyglassy or Rama, or we do have many open models out there. We have the 40B, 70B models already out there, and that's not what we call a foundational model. The model that I say is impossible for the public sector is something that's created by Google or OpenAI or HyperClover X. HyperClover X also has so many parameters. That's by Naver. So I'm mentioning these large language models, the LLMs. So training these models in itself requires so much data. It's not just data. The GPU resource in itself, there's a greatly huge consumption of GPU resource. So that's something that we cannot burden. And we do not have to reinvent the wheel when you want to build a car. We can just change the engine. That's our approach. So if I use this same analogy, if you want to utilize the car, there are many types of cars. There could be the truck, there could be a typical type of car that we need, and then we can select the engine. So we tried out many different things. So we tried out different models. So it's about basically trying out everything and making modifications when necessary and selecting what we think is most optimal. But as long as we can guarantee data security, and if it can be on premise, of course we can work with external partners. But for the time being, I don't think we can use Google or ChatGPT due to these, or Antrofit due to data security issues. There are a couple of domestic corporations, but we do need to review their technical capabilities. So we cannot say anything this for sure. But I just want to mention that based on open innovation, anything can be possible. And then we have KIST and NIA. KIST, as far as I know, is currently looking into developing a public sector AI model. And I know that they've actually demonstrated in front of the National Assembly to show a statistical model. So depending on the purpose and objective, you can probably select a typical size model. And at NIA, I know that they've actually are thinking of gathering public data, and I'm pretty sure they've completed the digitalization that can be used to train the model. But for us as an institution, we're slightly unique, so we have to focus on our own internal data. And I think that it's been pretty much resolved. But in the past, we had a payment settlement system, and if we want that to be translated, Naver, the output was payment and payment system. So payment and settlement is different, but they weren't able to identify the difference between the two. And then, there were certain cases where it was translated. You can see that for CVS, for instance, there was a different type of translation. So it needs to be adapted based on the domain because of the different terminologies that are used. So I mentioned that we will use there are many models out there. We've mentioned about the RAG model, but then once again, due to the security issues, that we have to be on premise. But we really wanted to try something out, and we are quite early in the game, so we tried to provide some type of model from within. So to answer your question, due to data security issues, we cannot. It's very difficult to partner with external parties, and that's why we tried out different types of models. So it's trying out all of these models, but you can see that. There is no open model from the government, so we wanted to internalize our own system, and we were focused on modifying the domain. And for collaboration, we're always open for collaboration if it does befits our needs. Thank you. Yes, and just to briefly respond to your question. Something that's done by the government is to become a digital platform government. So it's something that goes beyond the e-government concept. It's about converging and combining public-private data, and the private services through public data can actually innovate. So that's the digital platform government ideal that the current administration has in its digital policy approach. So you've talked about NIA, these institutions, and they're all currently doing these projects that's about achieving the digital platform government. And I'm sure that's the same case for other governments. But of course, for governments, there's a security issue. So there are some limitations compared to what the private sector can do. But despite the limitations, the digital platform government aspires to overcome these barriers that existed from the past. So in the run-up to the e-government, there were many services that were offered to the public, and a lot of that has been digitalized with e-government. And even at home, if there are any complaints, you can actually file a complaint on the system. But now we want to go one step further, where even if there isn't that need or request, to really have the government provide these services by identifying a need. So for instance, if you want a birth certificate, or if you want to register your child, in the case of Korea, you have to go to a local administrative office, and only when you register your child, you can receive welfare-related services. However, the digital platform government's ideal is to have the following, where just by the fact that a child was born at a hospital, registering the child into the resident system and the welfare benefits that are offered and all of the benefits that are provided to the moms and dads would be automatically provided to the public. So this is the goal of the digital platform government. So I want to mention that, as our professor has mentioned, well, it's, I think, something more than introducing a chatbot. If we do have a digital platform government in place, I believe that an AI-based type of public service can be rendered to the citizens.
Desperate. I think we have time issue, but yeah, it's final question, please.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this golden chance, because I think I'm the last. And I really congratulate the presenters for nice presentations. And the presentation is most relevant to, of course, to us, for some of us who are working in the government. And we are struggling for, improving service delivery to the citizen. And I think artificial intelligence is very important for improving service delivery. But I also comment and add up on what Mr. Park has just said. In lower developing countries, we are still struggling on investment in technology. So I think it will take time for us to get to the pace that Korea has managed to be, because of the infrastructures are not yet established to most part of sub-Saharan, of course, Africa, where I come from. But I think we still have a role to do, because we cannot be lag behind just because we don't have full-fledged infrastructures. We can also think of having maybe a few sectors, like productive sectors, where also contribute to service delivery to the citizen, of which it can also contribute to country economy. So I think it is a takeaway for us to make a full use, a strategic use of opportunities from countries that have been able to move through technology. And because now we are moving to artificial intelligence, and of course we are lag behind, but we need also to leverage existing opportunities and having a smart partnership with other countries like Korea, which have improved much in this technology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. May I assume that's your just comments, right? Right. So. But before we conclude this session, if any of you, the presenters, if you want to have any final remarks, then you can share. But maybe not. And then I will conclude this session here. I will just wrap up the session. Really, I really thank our presenters, Jung-Pil Park and Egskov and Kang Yong Lee, for their enlightening talks on AI and big data in central banking, taxation, and digital bill of rights. And the insights have significantly enriched our understanding of these complex fields. And also our discussions and comments and questions were equally enlightening. I really appreciate for your contributions. And I really, again, I thank all of you for your valuable contributions and participation, and to make this session a success. And here, let me just close. Thank you very much.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to our chair and speakers for sharing their valuable insights with us. Thank you once again. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the first Fiscal Policy for Growth workshop. We want to thank each and every one of you for your participation throughout 2 days. And we hope this workshop has served as an opportunity to renew everyone's interest in the topic, and furthermore help promote exchanges of policy ideas and knowledge among participants, academia, and the public sector. Thank you very much, and we wish you safe journeys back home. And one housekeeping note, the KDI bus will be departing at 12:45, so don't miss out on that. And please take the bus at 12:45 p.m. Thank you very much.